Hello everyone, my dear followers. Welcome to the final chapter of this fanfic that has been with us on the channel for so long. If you haven't seen the previous installments, you can find them in a playlist on the channel. Without further ado, enjoy.
Last time, it's the only thing that has a chance at saving us. We have to do this. Yujito implored of her tenant, getting a defeated sigh from the monster cat before the Biju relented and decided to go with her container's plan. The moment she and Nibi were ready to do what must be done, Satori suddenly turned to the left before its entire body went stiff and it hurriedly rocketed up high into the sky above the prison. Then just a moment later, a mass of black flames went racing across the space that Satori was just occupying and straight into one of the walls off to the side, the flames sticking to the wall and burning in place. "Wait, is that?" Sure asked, feeling much more on edge now that he recognized what he was looking at was the legendary black flames of Amaterasu, which were said to burn for 7 days and 7 nights. It was also the calling card of Itachi Uchiha, who personally none of the Cloud Shinobi wanted to see right now. An S-ranked missing Nin along with a creature they couldn't even scratch. Well, the odds were by no means in their favor right now. Damn! I missed! To the shock of those shinobi who were at the Chunin exams back at Konoha a few years ago, the person that suddenly appeared standing in front of Yujito was a shinobi with black hair, but what really revealed who it was to Yujito was the sense she got from him. "Naruto!" She whispered, looking at him, shocked to see him again and shocked to see him here of all places. Hearing his name, the young man turned his head, letting Yujito see the new pattern of his Sharingan. The Mangekyo pattern of his eyes, zoning in on Yujito, catching her staring into the center of bladed flower design of his eyes. Staring into the blue-slitted eyes of his fellow Jinchuriki, Naruto's face showed a moment of surprise, seeing a whole group of Cloud Ninja standing behind him. Most of them faces he knew on some kind of level. He just assumed that it was Killer Bee fighting the monster since their presences kind of outreached all the others, but it looks like he was wrong. "Huh. So it's you guys keeping that ugly thing busy?" Naruto mumbled, just loud enough for Yujito to hear, causing her to nod slightly. The blonde woman was just about to reply when the flow of blood running from the bottom of Naruto's, like they were red tears, suddenly came flowing down the side of his face to his jawline. Groaning silently, Naruto resisted the urge to grab the side of his face in front of all these shinobi and kunoichi from the land of lightning. "Ha! So this is what it feels like to make use of the Mangekyo Sharingan outside of Kurohane Forest. Gee, good to know." The blood suddenly coming out of Naruto's tear ducts caught Yujito aware, and her first instinct was to ask if Naruto was alright. Because after all, back in the Chunin exams he did save her, and that debt had yet to be repaid, but then Yujito suddenly remembered just what Kekai Genkai she was dealing with and averted her eyes. Naruto, who was watching her, chuckled softly and turned his gaze away from her, wiping the blood off his face but smearing some of it in doing so. "No need to worry. We have the same enemy here." Then on cue, Satori came fluttering back down, landing back on the box, giving the wall that was slowly burning away a passing glance before focusing back in on Naruto in particular. After a moment of silently regarding the new combatant, Satori's mouth stretched out with another of its sick, nightmare-inducing grins. "I almost didn't see you coming because of all this fear in front of me, but your fear is something completely different. You aren't afraid of me like them, are you?" Naruto skillfully ignored the taunting of the beast, directing his attention to the assortment of Cloud Shinobi without ever taking his eyes off of Satori. They had been battling the beast firsthand. Perhaps they had some kind of intel on it that he couldn't get or didn't get in his preparation to come to Kusagakure. "Did any of you notice any weaknesses in the Satora while you have been fighting him for however long that you were, because that kind of information would be wonderful right now?" Naruto asked, remaining perfectly calm despite the situation he threw himself into. Darui, who had been standing in the back after his latest failed attack, was able to see the respect on the faces of Omoi, Karui, and even Samui, and figured that if Yujito was more than willing to be that close to an Uchiha, then it would be for the best to work with him this time. Sighing, the dark-skinned man walked up to stand on the other side of Naruto, a hand being ran through his shaggy white hair. "Unfortunately, that chink in the armor that you are looking for isn't there. It has shown the ability to dodge all of our attacks, even ones as fast as a laser." He saw the back of Naruto's head bob subtly, showing the raven-haired shinobi hailing from the land of fire was listening to him. Placing his cleaver-like blade on his back once more, Darui figured that a close-quarters combat scenario wouldn't work too well for him if B was struggling with it. As he went about addressing the situation, Darui's eyes focused in on the side of Naruto's head for a moment. We may be working together right now, Uchiha-san, but the Raikage will still need to know about your new Sharingan, and I'll tell him. Meanwhile, as Darui thought about doing his job like any dutiful shinobi of the militarized Hidden Cloud would, Naruto too was in his own thoughts about that little revelation. Not a single scratch, that complicated things. Okay, apparently this thing has some ridiculous dodging abilities, which means I probably should use Amaterasu anymore, or at least until a hit is guaranteed. The strain is just too much to use it with impunity. Looks like we're going to have to do this with classic, everyday ninjutsu then. Knowing he could use a shadow clone to do it, but figuring that it would be for the best if he saved as much chakra as possible, even being an Uzumaki. Going through the necessary hand signs, Naruto turned his head towards Yujito, letting his Mangekyo Sharingan fade back into the normal 3-tomo Sharingan. You pack the firepower and I'll bring the wind. If we can't hit this abnormality with precision, let's cast a wide net and see what we catch. Waiting for Yujito to engage him, Naruto halted the pace of his hand signs, making use of his Sharingan to perfectly time his jutsu to mesh perfectly with Yujito's. Futon, Daitapa. Wind release. Great breakthrough. Slash Ketan. Nezumi Ketama. Fire release. Mouse hairball. Upon the call in tandem, a strong squall of wind rushed through the courtyard, throwing any loosely put down clothing up just in time for a spray of blue mouse-shaped fireballs. Hit the strong wind, taking advantage of the elemental relationship, creating a spread net of flame that rushed Satoru's way. Despite how effectively the two blondes moved in combination, Satori was 3 steps ahead, already positioning itself behind the box, using the durable, indestructible nature of the box to shield itself from the wave of blue fire coming its way. Satori waited until the immense heat it felt all around subsided before it came out from behind the box, but found as it came up there was a wave of Narutos all glaring at it with their Sharingan spinning, but immediately they all dispelled, leaving a screen of smoke clouding around the Demon of Enlightenment. Now, right on cue, the combination of Samui, Omoi, and Karui stood at the forefront with the white-haired and red-haired sword-wielders holding the same combination of hand seals as Naruto manipulated the smoke with his wind to give them a minuscule section of the beast's black flesh to aim at, which was all that they needed as they took aim with their jutsu. Raitun, Rarigan, lightning release, railgun. From the sights they made with their fingers, the pair fired 2 blasts of concentrated lightning surrounded by static just as Samui finished her hand signs. Rantun, Ryza Sakasu, storm release, laser circus. Following slightly staggered behind the railgun blasts from her comrade, Samui knew that it would only take a few moments for the speed of her jutsu to have her technique race past the first 2, but even as she watched her jutsu soar past Omoi and Karui's, she could see that Satori was no longer there. Was the trio of lightning-infused attacks went sailing through the smoke. Not cool. The cool, blonde beauty muttered, brushing a lock of her short blonde hair behind her ear. B, who jumped back into the fight, positioned himself behind the demon and brought down another one of his tentacle tails, trying to lash across the monster from the box, but just like every other attack that was thrown its way, the monster swerved out of the way, but this time, instead of engaging the perfect Jinchuriki, Satori glided over the wall and gathered up another gaggle of prisoners, which was what Naruto stumbled upon watching until the raven-haired Uzumaki clan head heard a familiar voice shout out, "I am not afraid of you, Muku, but what are you doing? Snap out of it, will you?" Naruto watched from the wall he was perched on top of as Ryuzetsu fearlessly ran towards the talon claws of the Satori, who actually looked taken aback as it staggered backwards, even dropping one of the nearly dead prisoners as it stumbled back, actually looking to Naruto's eyes that it hadn't seen Ryuzetsu coming, which confused Naruto considering that the beast had seen everything up until now. The hair on the back of Naruto's neck stood on edge when he watched the beast toss the bodies over his head back towards the suction force of the box and turned its body Naruto's way, looking perhaps more furious than it had before, which Naruto felt, and could only shake his head, hoping against hope that it would in some way dissuade the Satori, but when its crooked mouth twisted horribly, he could only sigh. Oh crap! Premonition or not, Naruto's concern was well-founded, because harsher than it had before, Satori started to violently flap its wings, causing the wind to cut at Naruto's bare knuckles, face and ankles before the squall through the shinobi from the wall and out of the courtyard of the prison all the way into a field over 200 yards away, groaning as his body finally came to a stop, sliding and bounding off of the ground. Naruto spit out a mouthful of blood that came from hitting against a number of rocks and other objects on the ground, grimacing in pain, running his tongue along his bottom lip, licking and lapping up a sanguine-tasting glob of red liquid. Naruto groaned and tried to sit up, only to hiss in pain at the number of stinging places on his body, the friction burning and cutting his skin. He could already feel the Kyuubi's presence healing up the damage done, though it had to be done carefully with the amount of energy the Ninetales had lost to fuel the blood clone from earlier. "Hey Kyuubi, do you have anything about this thing that I can use?" There was a few moments of silence while Naruto waited for his answer, where the only thing that he could hear was the whistle of the wind blowing across the field of grass filled his ears before the gruff sound of the demon in his gut came from the back of his mind. "Not anything of note, no. All I remember about the Avatar of Enlightenment was that it was not something that should ever be let loose, or it will grow and grow in strength infinitely." "That's reassuring," Naruto mumbled sarcastically as his eyes narrowed when he realized that there was a shadow covering his body, and it was getting larger, meaning that it was getting closer. "Really? You followed me all the way out here?" Naruto complained as he finally managed to get himself into a sitting position as Satori hovered a few feet in the air above Naruto with its mouth open and a red glow emanating from its maw. The same red glow Naruto had interrupted the first time. "You're not afraid of dying, boy, not like most. No, you're afraid that your past will repeat itself. That because of weakness you will be vulnerable and alone, betrayed by all you know. That's what makes you tremble, what makes you afraid. Loneliness." How the beast could speak with its mouth open was beyond Naruto, but that wasn't what was on his mind. It was what Satoru said that made the raven-haired Uchiha glare at his opponent through the red eyes of his bloodline limit. Naruto did not need to see the full results of the attack to know that whatever this attack was not something that he wanted to take directly without any kind of defense. Channeling more chakra into his eyes, Naruto's Sharingan evolved back into its Mangekyo state. Susanoo. Whispering the name of his protection entity, Naruto was quickly covered in a bright flash of white. A vibrant glow so bright it even swallowed the red glow. Once that glow finally subsided, a white skeletal torso covered Naruto's body, fur draping off its shoulders like that of a tribal warrior. From beneath the head of the bear thrown over its skull, the amber eyes of the Susanoo glared vehemently at Satori as its attack formed into a dangerously glowing red sphere. Lifting its hands, the guardian deity turned its palms outward, shielding its body and consequently Naruto's body from the incoming blast that Satori had just shot from its opened gullet. The red energy dropped like a rock and collided with the hands of Susanoo, and for a few uncomfortably tense moments for Naruto, he watched the back and forth, give and take for ground between his defense and Satori's offense. However, before any conclusive winner could be determined, the demonic sphere suddenly exploded, casting the entire 100-yard radius around Satori and Naruto in a dome of red energy that expanded high into the sky. Looking up from where she was in the prison, Ryuzetsu saw the red dome of violent destructive energy rise high into the air, bathing the immediate area in an eerie red glow. She was snapped out of her reverie when she noted that the one coming from that direction was Satori, soaring through the cloudy, dreary sky. Glaring heatedly at the monster that she associated with taking her best friend, Ryuzetsu slammed her hands together and called on her chakra, ignoring the burning sensation in the moment of adrenaline. Katan, Anadoro. Fire release. Demon lantern. Slowly out of the very air itself, handfuls of strange flaming orbs started to materialize, and out of those fiery orbs, disturbing faces with glowing yellow eyes started to form. Ryuzetsu looked at the 10 lanterns with a bit of disappointment with the amount of damage the seal did to her ability to perform a simple ninjutsu. However, ignoring her own shortcomings, the white-haired Kusakunoichi sent forth her horde of lanterns at the aerial yokai. About 7 of the attacks were off due to trajectory, but the 3 that collided with the back of Satori caused the beast to screech in pain as its body was burnt, causing its landing to end a bit clumsily. Gah! She screamed out her agony as she felt a fire suddenly build around her body, the consequence of making use of a ninjutsu technique, accessing her chakra with the Tenro seal still placed on her body. But luckily for the white-haired Kunoichi, Marwa was there to put out the fire and take her to the roof of one of the buildings where they'd be safe from Satori, who now looked to be even more ferocious than before upon being hit. Meanwhile, a few courtyards away, the Kumo contingent surrounded the box of ultimate bliss, trying to decide what to do. What if we try and break this box? Since the monster came out of this thing, maybe getting rid of it gets rid of the monster as well. That suggestion came from Omoi, who with his sucker in his mouth gave a cautious look at the box that was opened. The suction of the box having come to a halt after Satori left the area was the only reason that the shinobi from Kumogakure were even able to get as close as they were currently. Sure, who was standing between Omoi and Darui's side and ran his hand along his forehead, causing his knuckles to shuffle through his pale blonde hair for a moment before he turned his head to Darui and B, who had went back to his normal state before shrugging. It sounds like a good idea to me. We haven't been able to even scratch that thing, so why not break the box? HMH. Well, all this would take is a tailed beast bomb, and I'll put that ugly thing into a tomb, B said, nodding his head along and ignoring the fact that those words didn't even rhyme when put together. If destruction was needed, then he was more than sure that his strongest attack would get the job done, which meant that he could go back home and hold a concert for all of his adoring fans. Thankfully for everyone around, that the Eight Tails was always around to keep B somewhat on a leash when the Raikage was not able to subdue his younger brother with his iron claw. "B, you idiot! We can't use the Baijidama here, or are you forgetting the fact that this prison is still needed to keep all the scum in afterwards? If you use the tailed beast bomb, then this whole place is going to get leveled." "Oh, that's right, yo, I guess that's a no-go," he mumbled to himself, reaching up and scratching his chin, seemingly have gone back into deep thought as to how this seemingly impossible task could be completed. This left Gyuki to wonder just how he got stuck with such an air-headed container to begin with. He stood there contemplative for another few minutes before he snapped his fingers and pulled Darui away from the crowd. Yujito and Samui, who were watching the two go on, shared a look before Samui sighed, and Yujito shook her head slowly. Placing her hands on her hips, Yujito gave her fellow Cloud Jinchuriki an exasperated stare before she too sighed upon seeing Darui shrug and released the sword that was kept on his back, meaning that he ended up agreeing with B. "Well, this should be good. With one mighty hurl I shall fly. The mighty killer be up in the sky, oh so high. Yeah," he shouted with a thumbs up directed towards Darui, who nodded and sent his sword slashing upward while focusing chakra into his arms to make the action faster and more powerful. B, who was standing on the flat side of the blade, also used some chakra to jump at the apex of the swing, using the momentum of Darui's upward slash to send him even further into the sky above. When he reached the top of his ascent into the clouds, B curled his body into a spherical shape, letting his shape rotate a few times before he uncurled facing downwards. Catching a glance of the box through the cloud cover, B drew his hand back as it went through the transformation of his human hand to that of the massive mitt that belonged to Gyuki, the Eight Tails. Leaving that fist at the forefront, B gave out one last shout before he begun spinning, letting his transformed fist point downward like a spiraling lance, making a stab straight for its destination. He cut through the air like a knife, slamming right down on the box with a hallowing crunch, hitting top of the box so hard that the ground beneath the box gave way that much more that it sunk down into the earth, leaving it unlevel with the surface. There were even visible rings rippling around from where B's fist was connected with the top of the box. B himself was staring at the box from behind his glasses, glaring tightly at it. He personally couldn't believe that it didn't even dent so much as a bit. Karui, who felt it necessary to give her mentor some support seeing that his plan failed quite miserably, took a breath and brought her hands up to her mouth, ready to give some loud cheering that he seemed to love if his numerous concerts were any indication, but before she could even say one word, there was a loud screeching sound that most certainly did not come from her. KKK, KKK. KKK. That was the sound that continued to screech out, causing Yujito to cover her ears and cringe as her sensitive hearing brought her one hell of a headache as it continued to ring in her inner ear. The pain was enough that for sure she thought it would make her ears bleed, causing the feline like Kunoichi to hiss painfully. Someone please make that sound stop," she screamed, part wanting and having to voice her pain, part having to yell over the shrieking, and the final part her having her ears covered by her hands. Samui, who was standing next to her, just finished picking at her ear, checking for that same blood that Yujito was worried about, turned her concern to Yujito, who she started to rub on the back, fully aware of her acute sense of hearing. "We would, but it's actually coming from inside of the box of ultimate bliss," she said with a deepening frown as she turned her gaze to said open box that seemed to be acting like an amp for those horrible sounds. "I have got a bad feeling about this," Omoi mumbled around his sucker as he pulled out his sword, wrapping both hands around the hilt and keeping it pointed out in front of him, nervous and not wanting to be caught off guard by this box. Ever since they had arrived, this box had been nothing but trouble. A truly bad omen, and Omoi was not about to convince himself to start thinking that everything was all right now. Then, just as Omoi said that, the constant, almost monotone chant that had been coming out of the box suddenly stopped, leaving the space around it to fall completely silent. Not even the wind was willing to blow in this moment. Every shinobi there suddenly felt even more tense than they had when the constant chanting was going on. Well, everyone aside from Karui, who moved next Omoi and punched him in the arm, causing his sword to dip a bit before he righted himself. "Ha! Bad feeling my ass. I should have known you were just being a big baby. especially considering that you say that same damn thing every time that we go on a mission, even when we were forbidden from taking anything more than D ranks. Seriously, Omoi, you really need to grow a spine or else you will never be able to find a strong, capable woman much like myself. The more that she went on demeaning Omoi, and in the most friendly way. While promoting herself, she slowly moved so that she was standing in front of Omoi and leaving her back to face the box, much to Omoi's dismay. No. Seriously, Omoi, think about the future. How are you going to do anything if all you do is complain and worry about what might happen to you? It's a wonder that you even made Chunin. When the redhead that was ripping into her friend saw his eyes widen. She thought that perhaps she finally managed to break through to him, causing a victorious smirk to break across her features. He lifted his hand like he wanted to say something, but she shut him down by putting a hand on his shoulder, shaking her head. Now there is no need to thank me. I'm just looking out for you like any good friend. Screw this, Omoi said with an uncharacteristic amount of annoyance in his voice as he placed his hands firmly on her shoulders and turned his teammate around to face the box, letting her see something that caused her amber eyes to expand quite the same as Omoi's did just moments ago. And the reason for that? The reason was that she was seeing a horde of creatures marching out of the side of the box that she and the rest of the Cloud Squadron was facing. Each of these creatures looked the same in the way that they had a black humanoid torso on top of the lower half of a snake. Their arms were abnormally long, and they were topped off with long claw-like fingers on each hands, much like the Satori itself. But what caught her eye the most was their heads, because while they had the black outline of a skull, there was nothing there in the face. It was an empty void that allowed them to see the back of that black outline, almost like that had been forgotten. What are those? Karui mumbled with a bit of a quiver in her legs as she and Omoi instinctively moved back to back, much like Samui and Yujito had done, as the horde of Hanta hunters slowly started to surround them in a complete circle, separating the pair of Yujito and Samui from Omoi and Karui. Who cares? We have to fight, Darui shouted over the sound of the Hanta surrounding him. He had to spin on his feet, holding his blade out like a third arm, bisecting the monsters that had surrounded him so that he may be back to back with Shure and B. With Naruto, the red light that had swallowed up the space around the prison field had finally faded, and with it Naruto's eyes opened, sitting up and groaning as he made it to a seated position. His Susanoo, which was still clad to him, didn't even seem fazed by what was just unleashed upon it. I'm glad that the attack didn't seem to fully reach me. That's not an attack I want to test my Susanoo with unless I have to. Suddenly his eyes widened and Naruto fell forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. He started to throw up blood, taking a moment to recompose himself after the retching that his insides went through during his brief spar with that pain. Naruto sat back on his legs and rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand, cleaning the blood away. Note to self, using the Susanoo outside of Kurohane Forest hurts, the kind of hurt that reaches every cell inside of my body. Sighing under his breath, Naruto cut the chakra to his eyes, letting the Sharingan fade completely in hopes that the throbbing behind his eyes would go away. Placing his hand on the top of his thigh just in front of the knee cap, the Uchiha slowly started to stand up, wobbling a bit from the exertion that came from having to call upon the Susanoo. After a few moments of panting, Naruto managed to stand upright without any kind of struggle, his blue eyes narrowing off in the distance when he noticed the large body of Satori was hit by some kind of fire release. Alright, so it looks like I need to practice using these moves out of the environment of Kurohane, but doing so will harm my vision. Damn, what a problem. The sound of a screech off in the distance was what knocked Naruto out of his own irritation. Locking his knees, Naruto settled into a crouched position just as his chakra flared. In that same moment, the winds suddenly started to howl as they wrapped themselves around Naruto's body. The wind started to intensify and even change color into a light green from the usual clear transparency that came to be associated with wind. It was there but just never visible till now. He hadn't been spending all of his time working on the Sharingan. His other skills had been polished just as much, if not more. Fujin no Yoroi, armor of the wind god. Naruto's sharp blue eyes focused themselves on to the highest building there in the prison before he sucked in a deep breath and lunged forward into the air, but instead of falling through the sky, Naruto dug his foot into midair. He used it for a holding before he shot off of nothing, elevating higher into the air, as he literally crossed through the sky to get to his chosen point of arrival. Fujin no Yoroi, Tengakappa, armor of the wind god, heaven steps. Each time that Naruto's foot came down, the sound of the wind and air itself splitting around his steps screeched through the area, a trip that would have taken him a minute, At most 2 was completed within the span of a few seconds when Naruto suddenly came to an abrupt, perfect stop, splitting the space between Ryuzetsu and Marui. His sudden appearance caused both Ryuzetsu and the Cloud Shinobi to take a startled step back when they realized Naruto was standing there. What the? Naruto, I thought they took you to open the box. How are you on your feet? It was Ryuzetsu who asked the question that was burning on both ninjas' minds. Easy enough, I tricked Mui into taking a blood clone that they used to open the box of ultimate bliss. They did so, and while everything was happening, I was busy removing the Tenro seal. Naruto gave his brief explanation along with a slight shrug of his shoulders, taking the surprise and brushing it right off while also allowing his armor to fall off and vanish in the winds. He paused there and blinked before giving Marui a look. He didn't know exactly who this guy was, but he saw the Tenro seal and a cloud headband. Speaking of which, do you guys want me to remove those seals? It will be a cinch with my chakra available to me in full. Marui's hand went down to rub at his exposed chest where parts of the seal could be seen before the rest of it continued on under the cover of his coat. Ryuzetsu turned and gave Naruto a confused stare before she gained an expression of realization. You're an Uzumaki. Can you really remove the seal? I thought that the only one who could do that was Mui, the one who put the seal onto us. Scoffing, Naruto took a step towards the edge of the building they were standing on so that when he turned and looked at the two of them, they were both in his field of vision. That may be true if there wasn't a decent seal user in the place, but any Uzumaki or even Jiraiya could break something as simple as a chakra prohibitor and an elemental failsafe. Simple. There was a momentary silence where both the white-haired Kunoichi and Marui simply gave Naruto a deadpan stare that he cared not to notice. It was clear from their shared stare that neither of the ninja knew exactly what he was talking about, but both knew that from where Naruto was going with this, that it meant he should be able to break the seal. Right? And how would you break the seal exactly? Simple. I just put my hand on your chest. He responded without really thinking about the way that his words might have and did sound. Marui, who was familiar with what was coming next, moved to the side just a bit more, hoping to get out of the radius that was being covered by the eerie aura that Ryuzetsu was releasing. Meanwhile, Ryuzetsu's brow started to twitch irritably at hearing what came out of Naruto's mouth. Sure, he was a powerful ninja, but that didn't mean he could go around saying something so perverse, so openly, so bluntly. What did you just say? Her voice was merely a whisper, but even Naruto, who still seemed oblivious, noted that there was a change in her tune. Now, despite of everything, Naruto never really did have any experience when it came to women, because back in the village none of the girls even remotely appealed to him, and the one date he did go on was with Yuna, who was already interested in him enough that she was the one to ask him out, and she was the one who came to his place of residence to pick him up for the date. So yes, it was safe to say that his experiences with the opposite sex was still very much in the novice range of things. Hence why he was giving her a clearly confused look as to why she was upset about him doing good and removing her seal. I said that if you want me to remove that seal, then I am going to put my hand on your chest. This time, when he explained everything, he figured it was best to do it much slower and perhaps even more elaborate than the last time. Where the seal is located, so I can break it with my technique. His blue eyes suddenly widened when he realized what was wrong. It was a realization that caused a bit of color to make its way to his cheeks. No, I didn't mean it like that at all. The middle of the chest is where the Tenro seal is. That's all. Then, to make the point even further, he pointed to the one on the center of Marui's chest. Ryuzetsu's white eyes opened and closed rapidly for a few moments before she too came upon a moment of realization that she may have in the heat of the moment misinterpreted what Naruto was trying to say, which brought forth a blush to her cheeks as well, much to Marui's amusement. Oh! She mumbled, trying to cover her face with her bandaged left arm. Nodding, Naruto decided it was best to go to Marui first, who looked at him with a nod. He knew that Naruto was his best chance in making any kind of difference here. Naruto gave the man a nod of his own before closing his eyes and focusing, the blush on his face a thing long of the past, as he went into his serious, shinobi operating persona. Lifting his dominant hand up to Marui's chest, there was a visible glow on the surface of his palm, only instead of green like a medical jutsu, it was blue, showing it was raw chakra. Marui saw that there was a kanji on Naruto's palm that said, "Free." But what he didn't see were the two smaller kanji on Naruto's fingertips that tapped just above the top of his seal that said on the tips "Fire" and "Anti." The Uzumaki's brows furrowed for a moment before he sent a massive pulse of chakra through his hand. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Fuin, Kai. Uzumaki art of sealing, seal, release. Almost immediately Marui could feel whatever complex mechanism of the Tenro that was keeping his chakra repressed but still available was completely gone, causing the Kumo-nin to crack a grin. Opening his eyes, Naruto took a step back, jabbing his thumb over his right shoulder down back towards the spot where the box was. On my way over, I saw your comrades surrounded by something ugly things. They could probably use the backup. Taking Naruto's advice to heart, Marwa took a step forward and pat Naruto on his shoulder, grateful for what he had done. Thanks, kid. I'll do that. He then jumped down, leaving Naruto and Ryuzetsu alone of the roof of the building. With the past incident fresh on his mind, Naruto figured he needed to be brutally honest right from the get-go this time, which was why when he leveled his sharp but friendly enough blue eyes on Ryuzetsu's eyes that were staring back at him, he pulled no punches. Okay, I'm just going to lay this out for you. If you want me to remove the seal, I need direct contact with the seal like I did with Marwa. Which means... Naruto at the end of it started to mumble, sounding less and less confident about it as he averted his eyes. To say that she was uncomfortable with the situation would be a gross underassessment of the situation. Sure, Naruto was nice enough in the limited time that she spent with him, and she had grown to respect Naruto with each time that they spoke. That didn't mean that she felt comfortable stripping in front of him, but no, it's fine. I want to be able to help in this fight. I was never good at being the damsel anyways. She said that, maybe not confidently but determinedly, as she slid her arms out of the green kimono top, which she followed up with her black shirt, causing Naruto to blush and look away. But when he took a glance, he saw that her entire upper body was wrapped with white cloth binding her chest down. I guess that is how she managed to trick everyone into thinking she was a guy. I wonder how she got past the security pat-down. Maybe things were different back then. When he realized he may have been staring, if the glare that he was on the receiving end was any kind of indication, he hurriedly looked away with a slight gulp. He wasn't sure how long he was looking away, but he only turned his head when he heard from Ryuzetsu herself that it was okay. Turning around, her saw that her bindings from her collarbones to her bust were now loose, but she was holding her arms in a way that covered her modesty completely, using the cover the mass of white cloth helped to provide. Naturally, Naruto's eyes started to wander downward, but thankfully the seal was placed a few inches above the curve of her breasts, which made it more clear for Naruto to see how her gender might have been missed. With the bindings so tight no one would even consider that she was a girl, Naruto realized that now. Stepping forward, the raven-haired shinobi from the land of fire lifted his hand, and much like he did with Marwa, he closed his eyes to better focus his chakra. A moment later, his hand lit up blue with the same 3 kanji that lit before. Covering the seal with his hand, Naruto released yet another strong pulse of chakra through him, his brows furrowing as he did so. Uzumaki Fuin Jutsu. Fuin Kai. Uzumaki art of sealing, seal, release. The white-haired Kunoichi's eyes opened the moment she felt her chakra control return to her to the perfect degree that she once held. A gift thanks to her Kekiai Genkai. She immediately felt that Naruto took a step away from her and turned his back to her, something that she appreciated as she put her black shirt back on. Taking a kunai, she reached under her shirt and cut the bindings before she slid back into her kimono on leaving it open. Silently, she strolled up and stood next to Naruto as the two watched Satori look around at the scurrying prisoners like it was choosing from a menu at the local eating establishment. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto watched the Satori's attempt to abduct yet another soul, thwarted by the fact that the smaller humans hurried and hid inside of a building that was just out of Satori's grasp, much to the beast's ire. Ryuzetsu, do you have any tips as to how to hurt this thing? I saw your jutsu hit the beast, but when I tried to sneak attack it along with coordinating with the Kumonin, we couldn't even touch it. That was a piece of news from Naruto that caused Ryuzetsu to crane her head to the side, initially having to think if she did something different without knowing it. But when she realized that she had not, she instead gave Naruto a confused, bewildered look. Are you sure that you weren't just hesitating or something because of how afraid of this thing you were? Or something like that? Now it was Naruto that had a confused expression plastered to the features of his face. If that was true, then just how did Ryuzetsu manage to do harm to the Satori where no others could? He was so focused on the fact that this mystery just got all the more complicated that he didn't even answer her. Ryuzetsu, for her part, did not push him because she could see on his face that he was doing some thinking. Reaching back on every last piece of information that he could, Naruto piled everything together, from what he read beforehand to what he learned in actually facing it. For some reason, Naruto's mind wandered towards his time alone with the Satori and the words that were exchanged, or more what Satori said to him. Then he took what Ryuzetsu had just said, focusing on the word scared, which triggered him back to what Satori had said when Naruto's sneak attack had failed. Fear, being afraid. Those were two things that always seemed to come up when Satori was involved. Wait, is it sensing us through our fear? The books only said that it fed on fear, but if it is using fear to find us then… Frowning slightly, Naruto's eyes glanced to the side at Ryuzetsu for a moment before he too went back to looking at the steadily agitating Satori. If that's the case, then why isn't Ryuzetsu coming up on Satori's senses? Is it that she is immune to fear? How? No, that doesn't matter. I need to figure out why I am afraid. What am I afraid of? Naruto asked himself. He was by no means under the impression that he wasn't afraid of anything, because if that was the case then he'd either be supremely arrogant or insane. In the depths of his mindscape, the Kyuubi who was lounging on his hill opened a singular, blood crimson eye hearing Naruto's thoughts. Whether his Jinchuriki knew it or not, this was a moment that would help in dealing with his inner darkness if he was successful. Being with Naruto since literally day one, the Kyuubi knew Naruto just as well as he knew himself, meaning that he knew the answer to what was asking, but he wanted to know if Naruto could find the answer for himself. Needing to get to the bottom of this, Naruto suddenly dropped down onto the roof of the building, sitting in a meditative position, a look of focus on his face. This, of course, earned a few slightly louder than normally asked questions from Ryuzetsu, who was expecting nearly anything else from Naruto. However, her questions were ignored as the raven-haired Uzumaki clan head started to drift into his subconscious. When Naruto opened his eyes, he was expecting to be standing in front of a large, orange-furred chakra monster, otherwise known as the Kyuubi, hence the momentary surprise of instead finding an ocean of darkness surrounding him. It was just like that time right after the Chunin exams all those years ago, prompting Naruto to ask, "This again? I really don't have the time for riddles and frustration right now." Then, if he remembered correctly, all he needed to do was count down the seconds until he heard an even tone pointing things out to him that were brutally blunt, for better or for worse. He waited and waited, but when nothing came, Naruto's face scrunched up and he stood up, looking around futilely because still all he could see was darkness. The same thing he saw all those years ago. Nothing had changed one bit. Okay, I have absolutely no earthly idea what this is all about, but I do know that I don't have time for this, so maybe we can do this another time? Even trying to be polite as he was, it was clear that it was completely insincere and filled with irritation. Naruto recalled from last time that there was nothing he could do to free himself, so he figured appealing to whoever was in charge here might help. Haha, is this what the powerful Naruto Uchiha has been reduced to? Someone that needs to beg for help? Maybe I should just call you Naruto Namikaze then. Naruto spun around hearing that voice. This was one of those few times where he passed over being linked to Minato and Kushina, but only because of the voice itself. He knew that voice even if it was slightly distorted from darkness, because that was his voice, a much younger him. And he was not wrong, because standing there looking back at him with an eerie smile was a much younger him. His hair was a spiky black that was short and much like what his caretaker Mikoto liked it at. Then, to further drive home the fact, this boy form of Naruto was wearing blue pants and a white shirt with the Namikaze insignia in the center of it, but the difference from him then and this representation was the fact that this Naruto's eyes were a pure red color. There was no distinction from iris, pupil or whites, just red. Like a demon. The younger Naruto gave his lips a slight lick before they parted and showed his sharp teeth, his lips twisting into a sick, pleased grin. This was just the kind of reaction he wanted to get from Naruto: confusion and apprehension. Things that could be exploited. "What's wrong, Naruto? You look like you have seen a ghost? Not happy to see your past self?" Many people would love to have the opportunity to give advice to who they were. Naruto's wide-eye stare faded and was replaced by a harsh, piercing glare, but the subject of that fierce glare just laughed, completely unfazed with the way Naruto was looking at him, causing Naruto to scowl a bit. What kind of trick is this? Is the Satori trying to mess with me by bringing back the worst time of my life? Naruto's accusation was blunt and sharply directed, but the younger Naruto shrugged with a carefree expression. It is possible that the ugly thing could do something like this. But in this particular case, this is all you. Since I am sure you don't want to do the little song and dance about who I am and why I'm here, I'll just do things the anticlimactic way. You can just call me Fear, and I'm here to take over your body and bury you away." Naruto's eyes widened for a moment before he growled slightly at the insinuations behind Fear's words. He even took an instinctive few steps back to put some space between he and this supposed body thief. Naruto's course action caused Fear to throw his head back and start to laugh. "Yes, that's the look I want to see from you. To be honest, I was planning on waiting until you were weak since that's when your mental barriers would be down, but since you came looking for me, I just couldn't pass it up. I figured it would be appreciated to bring back some good memories, which is why I picked this appearance. What do you think?" Naruto's glare tightened further as he watched Fear brush down the clothing on his body, causing Naruto to have to look at a miserable time in his life, only bringing unrest to his chakra. "Quit with the joking. You want my body? Well, I am not giving it up without a fight, and when this fight is done then, I'll make sure you are removed completely without any prejudice." Naruto shouted passionately as he pushed off, already charging forth to level Fear with a fierce right hook. "Oh, you can try, but you will find that every last part of that statement is completely and irrefutably false, Naruto." But in his focus on dishing out some form of pain, Naruto missed the amused look flash across Fear's face before he appeared right in front of Naruto, his right fist smashing knuckle to knuckle against Naruto's in a perfect imitation. "But if you want to fight, then I suppose that we can dance for a little bit out of respect of this being your final time in charge." The difference between Naruto's stoic, intense silence compared to the bloodthirsty grin that was on Fear, and by association younger Naruto's face, was as different as dawn and daybreak. There was even the difference of Naruto's cool, blue eyes and Fear's violent, red eyes that showed difference, with the only common factor being the face. "Come on, Naruto. What's the fun of a fight if there is no banter?" "Bah! Forget it." Both bodies in the fight moved on the same path to disengage from the previous position, following the same course of actions where they both lashed out with the same identical kick. Both their hands were planted into the dark floor as the insides of their shins pushed against each other, struggling a few moments before realizing it was futile and jumping back to a readied position. "Okay, so he's been able to match each and every move I have performed, even with his smaller stature, which normally demands that I have a physical advantage, but apparently not this time. He's probably mimicking me just to get in my head. He's nothing, he's not me." In the time he spent trying to convince himself, Naruto failed to recognize the point that Fear had already managed to worm his way into the Uzumaki's forethought. "I really should be thanking you honestly, Naruto. Not only did you get stronger by awakening the Mangekyo, but now you're also afraid of being blind. Something that I haven't gotten the privilege of feeling in forever. So good. I don't have to use my Sharingan to defeat someone who could do no better than posing after me." He may have said that, but now that his Sharingan had been brought up, it felt like an itch in the back of his mind that he knew he couldn't scratch. Perhaps before he learned the price of his power, Naruto may have taken the risk, but going blind eventually from deterioration that was caused by the strain it put on his eyes was something too grave to ignore. He lifted his hand, forming the classic sign to create a series of shadow clones, his eyes drilling holes into the essence of Fear that was trying to manipulate him. "I can use plenty more techniques. Here, let me show you that I am not a one-trick pony. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." Three Narutos raced forward, ready to do battle with Fear, but before they could get there, they were cut off one clone. For one clone. Each of the clones was engaged in an old-fashioned test of strength, their fingers laced, using nothing but leverage, trying to force the one engaged with into submission. But considering that they were identical in strength despite of the height advantage of normal Naruto and child Naruto, they were evenly matched, leaving Naruto standing behind one side of the line and a laughing Fear on the other end of the three-clone, a peace stalemate. "Yes. Keep using up your precious chakra, because you are slowly getting weaker. Even if you are an Uzumaki, you will run out, and I will be there to take advantage." Fear bellowed with a smirk as all six clones leaned forward and headbutt the clone in front of him, causing a line of smoke to separate Fear and Naruto. But regardless of not being to see anything, Fear shook his head and clicked his teeth as he held a hand out, letting a sphere of rapidly shifting winds start to form inside of his palm. "Foolish." Lunging ahead, Fear made a straight line right for the separation of smoke with his hand that was holding the jutsu, leading the charge, knowing just what was coming for him on the other side. And he wasn't disappointed when his attack was met by an identical one from Naruto. The two spheres of wind grinding against each other, responding to the will of their user. Looking up from the meshing point, Fear smiled as his eyes locked with Naruto's, both of their mouths opening and saying, "Futon. Shin Kajioku." Wind release. Vacuum sphere. The sound of Naruto's normal voice and the gravely one that belonged to fear melded together, but even together their voices paled in comparison to the low screech that emanated from where the identical wind release techniques struggled for supremacy. However, both realized something quite quickly too when they noted the pressure in their hands had lessened. Thinking the attacks were dispersing, both looked down to find that the two attacks had managed to start to combine together and grow in strength, so much so and so rapidly that the two could no longer contain the potential energy in their hands. Both wielders of the jutsu knew that the amount of energy in their hands was no longer containable and hence dangerous to the both of them. Naruto was thinking it, but it was fear that spoke aloud, summing up their shared sentiment. Oh crap! Then, showing why their concern was well-founded, the mass of dangerous energy erupted in the form of an outward, circular explosion that propelled both combatants off of their feet and backwards. Their spines pointed back with their legs and head lurched forward. Hitting the ground and skidding off the darkness that was the floor, both versions of Naruto gasped out a pained groan and rolled on to their stomachs, hoping to relieve the pressure on their backs. Panting under his breath, Naruto tried to gather his bearings some after having his head bounce off the floor a few times. And needless to mention, but the floor wasn't quite the most comfortable thing to land on for sure. So that's what happens when you put too much power into that move. Explosive, concussive force to the face. Not sure of the state of his opponent, Naruto forced himself to a standing position before walking back towards the center of the explosion. A trail of copper-red blood dribbling down the right side of his mouth. He was pleased to see that when fear made it back in front of him that he was in a similar state, except instead of red blood running down his chin, it was a path of a thick, black liquid that looked like a sludge to Naruto. Licking his lips, Fear brought his hand up and used his thumb to wipe away the liquid on his face, cutting it off from just below the lip. It's always nice to see what my new body can do. Naruto's head was down, which made for an unreadable expression, but before Fear could get in another word edgewise, the sound of a laughing Naruto Uchiha found its way to his ears, causing his face to scrunch up in confusion. After sucking in a few more precious lung-filling gulps of oxygen, Naruto's head lifted, showing Fear a smile that was stained on one side by the blood that spilled from Naruto's mouth. You just don't understand. You can't take control of my body. For the first time since his appearance as a young Naruto with that familiar spiky, black hair, the entity known as Fear lost his composure, his youthful features breaking into a scowl, believing that it was Naruto and his inner confidence, or as he saw it, arrogance, speaking up. And why is that, huh? Is it because that you still have so much to do? Because you have a dream to fulfill that having me will only hinder you in completing it? Is that it? You think you can do it alone? That's it, isn't it? Blue eyes slowly moved upward to meet the glaring red orbs that opposed him, daring them for Naruto to say otherwise, but the raven-haired Uzumaki was not one to be so easily deterred. Shaking his head, Naruto reached down and gently placed his hand on top of Fear's right shoulder, causing the entity masqueraded as a small Naruto to recoil in visible shock from an action that was clearly not anticipated. Fear tried to pull himself free of Naruto's grip, but for some reason, no matter how hard he pulled, Naruto would just not let him go. No, that's not why you're wrong. You are wrong because that means you will be alone. And don't you think that you have spent enough time here in the dark, ignored? Don't you think so? Naruto's voice was softly worded and considerate, something that caused Fear's eyes to widen and for his knees to wobble some. Unable to believe just what was happening, Fear was literally stunned, speechless. Seeing me made me realize that I may have been a bit untrue to us in ignoring my fears. I was afraid of being hurt again after so much pain and emotional abuse that I suffered as a child. It is the same thing I have been doing to you, but I see it now. That you are a part of me that I can now accept. I accept that I am afraid of being alone, but let me tell you something. We aren't alone anymore. We have Suisei, that old crow, and a whole clan of summonings who will be there for us. We have two sisters that have gone out of their way to make things right. We know we can count on them. It may not be a whole village, but that is never what we wanted, isn't that right? Fear's red eyes were visibly tremoring along with his lower lip, but despite the appearance, there were no tears, but Fear's face did move into a warm smile as he clasped Naruto's forearm, squeezing it firmly. You're right. I am terrified of being stuck here in this terrible place with no one to talk to, but hearing you admit that is something that I needed. That we both needed. We are afraid, and that's okay because that's what makes us human. We fear things harming those we care about, and caring about things is not a weakness. Remember that, Naruto. Now that you know what you fear and have mastered it, go out there and kick that thing's ass for us and our friends. Naruto watched on silently as fear started to slowly sink into the floor below the two of them, completely unworried and wearing a similar, foxy smirk to the ones that he wore when he pulled pranks at a younger age. He wanted to say something fitting for what was happening, but was stopped when a bright flash of light filled the chamber, blinding Naruto with its intensity. But instead of fighting it, Naruto embraced it, figuring that this was his way out, and he was right. What Naruto didn't see was, in that brief moment of a flash, was a pair of eyes watching his every move. Those eyes carried an impressive amount of intensity inside of them, and once Naruto was gone, that voice that Naruto was expecting to encounter spoke up with a few brief words. "You are on the right track, Naruto." Last time, he was pleased to see that when fear made it back in front of him, that he was in a similar state, except instead of red blood down his chin, it was a thick, black liquid that looked like sludge to Naruto. Licking his lips, Fear brought his hand up and used his thumb to wipe away the liquid on his face, cutting it off just below his lip. "It's always nice to see what my new body can do." Naruto's head was down, which made for an unreadable expression, but before Fear could get another word edgewise, the sound of Naruto Uchiha laughing found its way to his ears, causing his face to scrunch up in confusion. After sucking in a few more precious lung-filling gulps of oxygen, Naruto's head lifted, showing Fear a smile that was stained on one side by the blood that spilled from Naruto's mouth. You just don't understand. You just can't take control of my body." For the first time since his appearance as a young Naruto with that familiar spiky, black hair, the entity known as Fear lost his composure, his youthful features breaking into a scowl, believing that it was Naruto and his inner confidence, or as he saw, arrogance, speaking up. "And why is that, huh? Is it because that you still have so much to do? Because you have a dream to fulfill that having me will only hinder you in completing it? Is that it? You think you can do it alone? That's it, isn't it?" Blue eyes slowly moved upward to meet the glaring red orbs that opposed him, daring them for Naruto to say otherwise, but the raven-haired Uzumaki was not one to be so easily deterred. Shaking his head, Naruto reached down and gently placed his hand on top of Fear's right shoulder, causing the entity masquerading as a small Naruto to recoil, invisible in shock from an action that was clearly not anticipated. Fear tried to pull himself free of Naruto's grip, but for some reason, no matter how hard he pulled, Naruto would just not let him go. "No, that's not why you're wrong. You are wrong because that means you will be alone. And don't you think that you have spent enough time here in the dark, ignored? Don't you think so?" Naruto's voice was softly worded and considerate, something that caused Fear's eyes to widen and for his knees to wobble some. Unable to believe just what was happening, Fear was literally stunned, speechless. Seeing me made me realize that I may have been a bit untrue to us in ignoring my fears. I was afraid of being hurt again after so much pain and emotional abuse that I suffered as a child. It is the same thing that I have been doing to you, but I see it now. That you are a part of me that I can now accept. I accept that I am afraid of being alone, but let me tell you something. We aren't alone anymore. We have Suisei, that old crow, and a whole clan of summonings who will be there for us. We have two sisters that have gone out of their way to make things right. We know we can count on them. It may not be a whole village, but that is never what we wanted, isn't that right? Fear's red eyes were visibly tremoring along with his lower lip, but despite the appearance, there were no tears, but Fear's face did move into a warm smile as he clasped Naruto's forearm, squeezing it firmly. "You're right. I am terrified of being stuck here in this terrible place with no one to talk to, but hearing you admit that is something that I needed. That we both needed. We are afraid, and that is okay. That's what makes us human. We fear things harming those we care about, and caring about things is not a weakness. Remember that, Naruto. Now that you know what you fear and have mastered it, go out there and kick that thing's ass for us and our friends." Naruto watched on silently as Fear started to slowly sink into the floor below the two of them, completely unworried and wearing a similar, foxy smirk to the ones that he wore when he pulled pranks at a younger age. He wanted to say something fitting for what was happening, but stopped when a bright flash of light filled the chamber, blinding Naruto with its intensity. But instead of fighting it, Naruto embraced it, figuring that this was his way out, and he was right. What Naruto didn't see was, in that brief moment of a flash, was the pair of eyes watching his every move. Those eyes carried an impressive amount of intensity inside of them, and once Naruto was gone, that voice that Naruto was expecting to encounter spoke up with a few brief words. "You are on the right track, Naruto." Feeling the subtle but clear change that came from leaving the stasis of his mindscape to the real world, Naruto took a deep breath and got back to his feet, standing next to Ryuzetsu with a look of determination etched into his face. blue eyes nearly overflowing with it. Ryuzetsu, who did not have the pleasure of knowing what happened to Naruto, turned to him and felt compelled to ask what happened. What was that all about? I realized that after you told me about what you did to hurt the Satori, that the reason no one else could put a scratch on it was because we are afraid something you are not. That's why I went into my subconscious to face my fear. Taking a few steps forward, Naruto stood at the edge of the building, peering down the monster that was blind to his presence. The white-haired woman next to him came to a stop next to Naruto, looking down at the beast throwing prisoner after prisoner into the box, and scowled at the beast that took her best friend. That doesn't matter now. We need to do something. He nodded his head quietly to her words, already having a plan to deal with the creature, but he would need her help in doing so. That is still the plan, but I am going to need your help. It looks like each time Satori is even relatively cornered, he tries to fly into the air. I need you to keep it on the ground while I activate a ceiling array. You up for it? Am I up for it? Who do you think you are talking to? Ryuzetsu challenged back with a smirk before she pushed off the building top, not even waiting for an answer before she started to bound from building to building, using her advantage against the beast to get behind it, hands already rushing through the signs Naruto himself was more than familiar with. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Fire Release, Grand Fireball Technique. Naruto watched as from Ryuzetsu's framed mouth came out a cone of bright orange flames that quickly morphed into the shape of a flaming ball that was fired off towards Satoru's back. Just before her attack could hit its mark, the beast turned its body, feeling the heat, using its wings to shield its main body. The white-haired Anbu from the Land of Grass turned her head slightly when she heard a chuckle coming from behind her as Naruto shot past her before dropping back to the ground, his Sharingan eyes looking up at her. Gonna have to try harder than that. Come on, Ryuzetsu, I am waiting after all. Naruto called out from the ground. She could feel the small tick twitching on her forehead, as even now that careless idiot down below taunted her, but she knew that his point was still a very much valid one that had to be reiterated. Grunting in frustration, Ryuzetsu decided to go in a different direction with her attack. She was gonna herd this thing into one spot. Katan, Anadoro, Fire Release, Demon Lanterns. One by one, those moderately sized flaming spheres with their nasty face came flying out of the sizzling air that was behind Ryuzetsu's body, swarming around the monster, creating a massive, rotating ring before one at a time the spheres shot into Satoru's body, pushing it in the direction Ryuzetsu wanted, and the smirk on her face spoke of that. Then, showing that her rank as an ANBU class kunoichi, Ryuzetsu's hands and fingers blurred in a series of motion that even interested Naruto, who was watching a good, safe distance away. What made it even more impressive was that her chakra came from out of her body as white and started to make the air itself sizzle. Spreading her palms out, Naruto watched on as four small orbs of white flames encased the Satori in a square formation. Katan, Sure High Ban, Fire Release, 4 Fire Burn. With a snap of her fingers, the 4 orbs shot high into the sky and disappeared into the dark clouds for a few moments before the clouds themselves started to brighten. Slowly the clouds parted and down came 4 beams of white fire that went all the way to the ground, where the flames started to vibrate before they turned and collapsed on the Satori, making it look like one geyser of fire. The only thing that was more prevalent, the smell of the beast's flesh burning with such a disgusting, revolting smell, was the deafening screech that the monster released. However, Ryuzetsu, who saw a sickening black smoke start to rise, covered her mouth and nose in case something toxic came off the beast while she watched it burn, sweat rolling down the side of her face from the sheer heat. As someone who was able to use the fire release, and quite proficiently in his own opinion, even he was impressed by the amount of firepower that Ryuzetsu was packing. Not only was the quantity and scale of the flames impressive, but the intensity of them was something to be feared. What a frightening move! Fitting for an ANBU. When the screeching died down and all that was left was the sound of the fire crackling on itself, was all that was left, the flames started to shrink and condense, leaving the Satori in place, but the effects of the attack was devastating. Where there used to be black flesh on its body, there was now scorched flesh, and even in certain portions its skeletal frame visible. And if that was not bad enough, then the fact that one of its wings was burned down until it was nothing more than a bone stub had made a few of the onlookers visibly ill as they turned away and tried to plug the smell from their noses. Ryuzetsu and Naruto both watched as Satori tried to use its talon-like feet to support its weight that was trembling from the pain that was no doubt enough to make even an ancient demon like enlightenment to quake in agony. Naruto, however, was not just sitting there watching, he was putting the final touches on the sealing array he was working on with the aid of his clones. The seal itself was quite large, and it had to be to fit Satori inside of it, and it consisted of a swirl much like the Uzumaki clan seal, but instead of ending in a tightly curled end in the middle, the massive center to the circle was empty. But just before that massive empty circle there were what seemed to be skeletal hands reaching out from each direction right towards where Satori was struggling to get back to a standing base. "It's time to put you to bed, permanently," Naruto muttered under his breath, glaring spitefully at the beast as he started to fuel the seal with his chakra, causing the ink to start to glow. Yuzukage Fuinjutsu, Dojo no Ketsugo, Whirlpool Shadow Art of Sealing, Soil Binding. Right as Naruto was about ready to activate the seal and finalize the complete demise of the Satori, the beast, with a sudden surge of energy that both Naruto and Ryuzetsu thought it no longer had, the beast started to suddenly gain altitude. "Damn it! Ryuzetsu, stop it!" Naruto cursed out as he was too busy keeping the seal powered up. However, before she got the chance, something that she did not expect happened when from out of the sky above her came a flying, or rather falling Mui, who had one of his hands pointed down with the other hand bracing that wrist. Screaming out his heart, the man's eyes glared hatefully at the beast while his long, black hair flew behind him, still flowing in the air. Katan Tenro, Fire Release, Heavenly Prison. The now non-gloved hand of Mui landed where the beast's face was expected to be, with a heavy thud that somehow even seemed to echo out around them, even being outside. It was not even half of a second later before the Tenro seal appeared around the beast's body, to scale, and started to shock it back into screeching submission. "Seal it now," Mui shouted as he looked over to Naruto, having to keep his hand planted on the beast so that the seal itself would remain as strong as possible. He knew that it meant he was going to die, but then he'd be with his wife and son, and he was at peace with that. "Ha! I knew that idiot was still kicking. I wouldn't have had to break the Tenro if he was dead." A change of hearts was not something I expected, though. "Oh well, this works," he thought to himself with a smirk, but in that moment that he was distracted, Satori used his one good wing and lashed out miraculously towards the direction of Naruto, whose eyes widened in shock as the speared tip of the charred wing went through his chest, just to the left of where Sasuke had stabbed him a few years back. "Naruto!" Ryuzetsu screamed in a panic, watching the wing of Satori lift Naruto off his feet, but the black-haired Uzumaki still had his hand sign held. Cringing in pain, Naruto could feel the puncture wound, and while it wasn't as large as the Chidori he had the displeasure of receiving in the past, but what concerned him more was the fact that he could feel something poisoning his system. I can't believe that I let my guard down, and how is that T-thing still moving?" Panting heavily, Naruto spat out a mouthful of blood that splashed against the seal before he started to wiggle his body, throwing all of his momentum backward so that inch by inch he could work his body off the spear that Satori's wing had become. "That's fine. I needed the B-blood anyways," Naruto called out as his fingers shifted once. "Fuin. Seal." The air shimmered before a translucent, purple barrier formed from the outer rim of the seal, creating a soundproof barrier around Mui and the Satori, which might have been for the best considering the fact that the earth itself seemed to be swallowing up the Satori, who was clawing, thrashing, and struggling to try and pull itself back up, its screams going silenced by Naruto's seal. Something truly horrible and fascinating at the same time happened, and that was that this thick, black, almost miasma-like substance started to wriggle off of the body of Satori and immediately started throwing itself against the barrier, which rejected it and sent it back to the ground. This happened a few more times before the black substance too seemed to lose its fight as it was sucked into the earth, with everything else left in the seal before the ink itself vanished. Smiling faintly, Naruto tried to stand back up and was met with momentary success thanks to the Nine-Tails chakra that was inside of him started cleansing it, but the Satori was older than even the Kyuubi, and that was apparent when Naruto dropped face first into the dirt, his complexion that had tanned out turning ghostly white as he struggled for breath. "Naruto!" Ryuzetsu called out to him once she landed back on the ground, and was sure that there was no sign of Satori, Mui, or even Muku left after Naruto's admittedly impressive seal had done its work. Not wanting to waste a moment as she saw that he had yet to move, Ryuzetsu dropped to her knees and came to a sliding stop right at his side. Grabbing him by his sides, her fingers dug into the seemingly worn but rather smooth material that was his trench coat as she used all of her strength and flipped his dead weight over onto his back. Instantly her training went to work and her eyes roamed down his front where she saw the initial wound, and to her shock it was already for the most part closed by some tender, pink flesh. What worried the ANBU was the fact that Naruto's blood was both red and black like tar. Was he poisoned? She asked herself, looking at his complexion and the hurried pace of his breathing before moving her fingers to his pulse point, only to find that it was slowly decelerating from whatever it was that he had been infected with. You idiot! You went and got yourself poisoned and almost killed. You don't even care about this land and you are risking your life for it? I thought you weren't a hero though, Naruto? This isn't your dream. The white-haired woman scolded her new friend while shaking him slightly, causing Naruto to groan, which ceased all her actions. Glaring at him as her eyes steeled with determination, the white-haired grass kunoichi set Naruto back down flat. No, I refuse to let you die. Closing her eyes and moving her hands from the bird seal to the sign of confrontation, her hands glowed white before the glow faded, and she parted his lips with her thumb by gently tugging at his bottom one. Ryumei Tensei. Dragon life reincarnation. She couldn't heal the poison scourge that was flowing entirely through his body with just her hands. She was going to try something more drastic and invasive. She was going to kiss him and connect their chakra networks to use the nature of her Kekkei Genkai to purify his blood. It would cost her the rest of her life force, but she was ready to make that sacrifice. Taking one final breath, Ryuzetsu leaned down, pushed her hair out of her face and pressed her lips against Naruto's, which she found to be surprisingly warm, all things considered. Getting past the moment of contact, she quickly went to work connecting their chakra networks, which only took a few moments to do. Once that was done, she then began the slow transfer of her life force into Naruto's, as she kept her eyes closed and the rest of her senses focused on his vitals. As she felt her body weakening to strengthen Naruto's, the white-haired woman went through silently, sending her thanks to the people that got her to this point, starting with her parents, then her sensei, to Muku for being a friend to her, and finally the man who she was saving that unknowingly liberated both her home and her mind. Just as she was about to resign herself to her coming fate, waiting for that moment where body gave out, her eyes snapped open because she felt the cold hand of Naruto on the side of her face, and when she looked down, her shocked white eyes found his half-lidded white eyes, and the two stared for a few moments before Ryuzetsu slowly pulled back, weak, but certainly alive. Her mind rebooting faster than Naruto's, she got her word out first. How? Chuckling softly, Naruto's fingers brushed the tanned skin on the side of Ryuzetsu's face before his hand fell away, his chest returning to a more normal pace of ups and downs. You know, Ryuzetsu, I don't think that fatalism suits you very well. Stopping and chuckling again, Naruto slowly tried to sit up, something Ryuzetsu had to help him in doing. Also, you just stole my first actual kiss. Blushing at the way he worded it, she quickly turned her head to the side, muttering a few choice words, but loud enough for him to still hear. Idiot, it's not like that. I was saving you. On the matter of that, she turned back to the Uchiha, confused. How did you recover so quickly? He moved his hand over the hole in his trench coat, looking down at the wound with a slight wince, but he was pleased to see that the last desperate act from Satorai hadn't scared him like the Chidori from Sasuke. Well, you already know that they needed tailed beast chakra to open the box, and I have some of the nine-tailed fox's chakra, and that helps with my recovery rate along with my natural Uzumaki genetics. Then there was whatever you were doing to help me. Thanks for that, he said sincerely with a bow of his head. Ever since he was young, a self-sacrificing act of kindness had been about as rare as a double rainbow in his life, and he needed to thank her for that. I was only helping you since you can't do everything yourself, she said, trying to dismiss his thanks, but in the end, the small smile on her face was undeniable. No matter who you were being thanked felt rather nice. The strange, and yes, it was strange, but the intimate moment between Ryuzetsu and Naruto was snapped when in front of them appeared Darui, Yujito, Samui, and the others, with Darui taking the lead in this situation. Did you two finish off that thing? Naruto and Ryuzetsu took a moment to share a glance before it was Naruto who turned to the white-haired right hand of the Raikage and gave him a slow, brisk nod, confirming that they had finished off the Satorai. Sure, who was standing off in the background, closed his eyes and folded his arms over the top of his chest as he nodded. It makes sense, since the box suddenly fell apart before the metal of it literally faded away. Darui had other plans, however, when he saw a very dangerous threat to Kumo sitting before him weakened, and with the avatar of enlightenment taken care, all that was left as a threat to Kumo, his beloved home as Naruto Uchiha. A weak Naruto Uchiha. The chance was just too golden to pass up on. Reaching behind him and freeing his large blade, pointing it at Naruto, causing everyone to go alert. As drab as it may be, Naruto Uchiha, I am afraid I am going to have to ask you to come with us. I'll ask once nicely. His clear threat caused Naruto's cool blue eyes to narrow dangerously, and for Ryuzetsu's hand to clench against his back, as she was clearly not going to let him be taken hostage. Even the Kumo ninja young and old were surprised by the man's rash decision. Samui was the first to take a step out from behind the experienced Kumogakure Jounin, her blue eyes leveled into a glare as she stood between Darui and his target, her fiancé. "What do you think you're doing, Darui? We can't attack him, or did you forget?" Samui's question was met by Yujito nodding her head behind the man, though there was a slight twinge of pain that traveled through her heart when she remembered that Samui and Naruto were engaged, since there was still part of her that had a crush on her fellow Jinchuriki. Where there was support for Samui, there was also support for Darui in the form of Omoi and Karui, who both had their blades at the ready leveled in the direction of the pair of non-Kumo ninja, while B and Shur remained neutral. Darui's usually lazy, unfocused eyes hardened some, which made Samui flinch in shock, since moments of passion like this were rare for him. Quickly he stepped forward so he could whisper to her and Naruto wouldn't hear him. "Are you crazy? We can kill him and take his eyes now, and then you won't even have to marry him. You'd be free," he retorted in a sharp but hushed whisper. "And what are you thinking? Do you think that someone like him would just go down without trying everything first? The fight won't be easy, and I am not entirely sure any of us could beat him. His eyes could stop Bisama and Yujito before they even get going. Shur's genjutsu will be useless, and don't even get me started with Karui and Omoi," she said, trying to use logic to just cover the plain fact she didn't want to fight him in the first place. Fortunately or unfortunately for them, before things could get any more heated, be pointed out what they missed while discussing what to do. "Hey, enough with all the quiet hush-hush talk," he already took his walk. When Darui and Samui took a look, they did indeed find that both Shinobi and Kunoichi had vanished from the spot that they were occupying, causing both Kumo ninja to sigh, but for different reasons. All the Shinobi left moved to form more of a circle instead of just letting Darui and Samui be in the forefront. With the silence spreading for longer than expected, it was Yujito that broke the silence left after the tense situation between her comrades formed. "So now, what do we tell Raikage-sama? I am sure Naruto will tell the people back at the Leaf what just happened." Instead of Darui coming to his own defense, it was the blonde-haired genjutsu specialist that came to his friend's aid. "Technically, all we did was request that the Leaf Nin come with us to deliver a report on the destruction of the Satori. It's nothing they can truly use to break our alliance that is soon to come." Nodding, Darui put his hand on Shur's shoulder and gave the smallest of smiles. "Right, but our business here is done. Let's get back home and make our report. Thanks for getting us out of there. I don't think I would have been able to deal with someone of his skill for long as I am now," Naruto said with a grimace as he felt the gravity inside of his body lift and then sink from the aftereffects of the shunshin. Helping Naruto sit down on one of the few rocks that were around the remains of the campfire, the two had a handful of nights back. Once she was sure that he was going to be able to support his own weight, she moved over to sit on her own rock. "Yeah, I wasn't looking forward to a fight right now either," she admitted as she finally allowed herself an exhale now that everything with Satori, the box, and the cloud was all over. "Why would you be fighting them?" Naruto asked curiously, as the concept of something or someone helping him in a personal matter that was not his sensei's of crows as foreign. If she had a bit more energy, she might have had glared at Naruto, but right now she was feeling both physically and emotionally drained by the whole ordeal, so all she did was smile and shake her head. "I didn't go through the work of bringing you back just so you could rot somewhere as a hostage." Naruto's blue eyes that were usually kept almost closed in a stoic stare widened in shock before they softened some, and a small, thankful smile took over his face. "I see, then I guess I should thank you again. I'm not used to people sticking their necks out for me." Why not?" Sure, Naruto was a bit cold and had some issues being overly sarcastic at times, but those were not any reason to not look out for him. It wasn't like he was some kind of psychotic maniac. Sighing, Naruto lifted a hand and brushed through his raven-black locks with his fingers, giving Ryuzetsu what could best be called a complicated smile that only made her more curious. "How about I explain that some other time? It's a long story, and I think I am a bit too tired to tell it." Seeing the way he reacted to it was enough for the white-haired Kunoichi to realize that she was treading a sensitive subject, which was why she immediately dropped it. "All right, but I'll hold you to that," she said with a smile as she gave Naruto a glance before she looked over his shoulder at the gray, overcast sky that was outside of the cave. With more and more of his strength coming to him as the moments came, Naruto took advantage of the lull and broke the skin on his thumb, drawing blood that he spread as he flashed through the signs. Kuchios no Jutsu. Summoning Jutsu. Ryuzetsu's attention was brought back to the man in front of her when the poof of the summoning seal released the creature that Naruto summoned, which happened to dissipate and reveal a crow with sleek black feathers that seemed to have an overcoat that gleamed, showing just how sleek his feathers were. Blinking its black eyes once the avian summon fluttered its wings one time to right itself and maintain a steady elevation, the bird turned its head to look directly at Naruto, who had a very faint smile on his face. "What do you need, Naruto-sama? Do you want me to bring a message back to Suisei?" Chuckling, Naruto shook his head and reached into his coat, recalling his hand and tossing out a piece of dried meat to the carnivorous bird that gobbled it right up. "No, not this time, Yoru. I need you to bring the message back to Shokei that my mission is complete." "Okay, no problem. I'll go right now. And Naruto-sama, I am glad you're safe," the bird said with a happy little chirp before it took off and vanished in a similar plume of smoke which it came into the world in. Having been able to see the interaction between animal and summoner firsthand, Ryuzetsu waited until Naruto looked back at her before she smiled. "It's nice to see such a bond between someone and their summons," she said honestly. Honestly forgetting that she was here, Naruto suddenly looked a lot more bashful than he was a moment ago. It wasn't often that anyone outside of the family he had made with the crows saw the dynamic that he shared with them. Yeah, well, we are a big family of sorts, so yeah." Uncomfortable with the potential subject, Naruto decided that it was time to quickly deflect the attention from off of himself. What better of a way to do that than to ask her what she planned on doing with her future? "So what is your plan, Ryuzetsu?" Not having planned that far ahead, Ryuzetsu brought her bandaged hand up to her jaw and cupped it pensively as she gently chewed on her lower lip in thought. "I honestly don't know if I want to travel around or stay here in the land of grass," she informed him, her eyes reflecting her lack of certainty. "Well, whatever you choose, I am sure you'll give it a good, long thought." One day later, Kumogakure. Standing in the office of the Raikage were Darui, Samui, and Marwa, each of which had pieces of information or perspectives that the group as a whole thought that the Raikage would want to and need to hear about the incident in Kusa's blood prison. Sitting behind his desk, the bulky, burly Raikage folded his arms together on the top of his desk, the golden wrist weights clanging against the sturdy wood of his desk. He moved his sharp eyes from one person to the next before he eventually came to a stop on Marwa. "Marwa, start your report," he ordered, causing the man to give a rather firm nod. "Well, the whispers we got a few months back about Mui planning something big in his prison was indeed true, and to find out what I had to get close to the warden himself. I'll save you the details on that part, but eventually Mui had me scoping out potential individuals that had a great amount of power, so he could use them to fuel the opening of the box." Marwa knew his Raikage well, which was to be expected with years upon years of serving him, and he knew that he was a man that wanted to get to the point of such things. Darui feeling that there were more important things that needed to be mentioned, like who was there, which is why he inserted himself in the report before Marwa could continue. "Boss, but there is something more important. Naruto Uchiha resurfaced and was there." Now that was a piece of information that had Ice eyes widen in surprise. Due to the raven-haired Uzumaki having almost vanished from the face of the planet for the past 3 years, there were many people who forgot that the winner of the last international Chunin exams even existed. Wanting to have this information confirmed, he took a glance at Marwa, who shrugged. Naruto Uchiha was someone who had recently been shipped in with the latest batch of inmates, and there was no preparation for his arrival. We, as those in the know, had no idea that he was going to show up. Marwa liked the kid, but it was the truth, and he had to tell his Raikage all of what happened. B uncrossed his arms and threw his hands from the left then to the right as he pulled out yet another one of his raps. Yeah, they didn't get him in a rumble, it was more of a stumble, oh yeah." Sighing at his brother and partner's antics, the Raikage closed his eyes for a moment and calmed the twitching he felt in his brow before he turned his eyes to Samui, who had yet to offer her insight on things. "Okay. So they used the Uchiha brat's power to open the box, what then?" Samui, seeing that she was the one being addressed by their village leader, straightened up some and continued the report. "When we arrived on the scene, Mui had just opened the box and was about to carry on with his wish. Instead of wishing for what his supporters wanted, he wished for the revival of his son. Her retelling of the story caused her to remember that moment of unnatural unease when the box opened something that still affected her slightly, which was why she paused, but being experienced as she was, she quickly played it off by brushing some hair out of her face. Things did not go as planned, and instead of his son, the Satori came out of the box, and we engaged it in a short battle before Naruto joined in, but even with our combined attacks we couldn't even touch it. Picking up where Samui left off, Darui rubbed the back of his head, disheveling some of his shaggy, white locks. Shortly thereafter, Naruto Uchiha took the Satori and started to battle the creature off in the distance while we were stuck dealing with these otherworldly creatures. Boss, the Uchiha has shown the Mangekyo Sharingan, and the Susanoo and Amaterasu. What I roared as he shot up to his feet. The abrupt nature of his action, nearly throwing his oversized desk to the floor, capsized thanks to his thighs hitting the underside of the desk when he sprung to his feet. The Mangekyo Sharingan was an instant boon to the strength of the hidden leaf, and just when he thought that the hidden cloud was getting the clear upper hand in terms of military power, he flinched when the desk hit the ground. Many times before that sound was the prelude that led to his brother delivering him the iron claw. Luckily, the Jinchuriki of the Hachibi, it was Darui that took the attention once more. Unfortunately, boss, I may have just gotten a glance of the head of that thing, but I know it was the Susanoo, and there is definitely no mistaking those black flames. Growling under his breath, the large man turned suddenly, causing his white and yellow robes to whip around him as he looked out the window that gave him a peering glance over his village. This is big news, but at least we have a secure relationship with both he and the hidden leaf. I am not so sure, thanks to Darui, Samui muttered under her breath, causing I to suddenly turn around and glare intensely at the white-haired man. What was that? He asked with no form of sympathy in his voice, the aggression apparent. Chuckling lamely, since it was all he could do in the literal face of his boss' anger, Darui wanted to look away, but he knew that was the wrong move, so all he could do was face down that glare with an apologetic smile. I may have tried to persuade him to come with us, using my sword. There was a snap in the air and a spark of lightning that surged across the Kage's broad shoulders as his anger got the better of him for a moment. Instead of backhanding Darui through a wall like he might have done to a lesser shinobi who did something so dumb, he took a deep breath. No, it is okay. If we get a message from Konoha about this, then we can cover it up as just wanting to make sure he had a secure way home after being gone for so long. After that, the room fell into a long, almost awkward silence before the Raikage stopped and looked at each of them, making everyone minus B to stand up a bit straighter. All right, you are all dismissed. The group then turned to leave, each and every one of them lost in their thoughts, some like B muttering things to himself, though they were not nearly as eccentric as his. Except for you, Samui. We have to discuss some things about your coming engagement. Stopping her plans of going home and relaxing, she turned her head to the Raikage and gave her head a soft nod. As you wish, Raikage-sama, she muttered with no sign of favor or annoyance as she looked to Ai to see what it was he wanted to talk about. It's about your engagement to Naruto. Then just like that, the indifferent shading to her blue eyes steeled over a moment before her eyes softened again. A complete and truthful representation of what she was feeling internally. If it is for the good of the hidden cloud, then I will do it, Raikage-sama. The blonde woman who had her entire ninja career in front of her said faithfully, even though this choice might derail the entire thing and relegate her mediocrity. I know you will, Samui. I know you will. What Samui did not know was that the answer that she gave was one that was almost directly similar to the one that Naruto had given to the Hidden Leaf Council when they had come to him with the same decision. Crossroads in the land of grass. Kusa no Kuni was not a place like so many others that were named and had nothing even remotely in common with the geography around it. In fact, Kusa was a place that one person could hardly look left or right without seeing wild grass that was taller than your average, to above average person. Roads in the land of grass could hardly even be called roads, since they were rarely anything more than simple dirt paths that were outlined by the tall grass that occasionally were dotted and marked by signposts in places like the one that Ryuzetsu and Naruto were currently standing in. Are you sure this is what you want? Naruto felt the need to ask as he looked at the friend he had no expectations of making, with a soft smile on his face. He had already asked her if she wanted to follow him, since he had one more stop to make before going back to Konoha, where he was sure there was a place for her in. Ryuzetsu's appearance was a little different now since she shed her bandana, placing it around a memorial cross that was left in memoriam for her old friend Muku, who had an empty grave next to his father's empty one. Now her long, flowing white hair was not covered, Not a single inch of her radiant white hair was covered. It was quite the sight when the sun hit her hair at an angle and just made her hair glow. Shaking her head negatively, she used one of her hands and brushed back the hair that was covering her eye, though it didn't help since her hair just swung right back into place. Smiling at the genuine offer he made, she reaffirmed her answer. I appreciate the offer, Naruto, I really do, but after all, that just happened. I want to make sure to that Kusa becomes stable. She truly thought that the refounding of Kusagakure would be her true home. All right, then I won't try to convince you any further. I hope that you can achieve whatever it is you have planned for your home. If you ever need some help or are around Konoha, stop on by. I still owe you for saving my life. The number of people that had to do that for him could be counted on one hand, and Naruto planned on paying back each of them when the time came. Ryuzetsu wanted to tell him that he didn't need to thank her for doing the right thing, but she had learned that Naruto was incredibly stubborn when it came to this subject, so she just let him have this one. I'll hold you to that, Naruto. There was a moment of no one saying anything that was broken when Naruto reached out and held his hand out for Ryuzetsu to take in a handshake. Quickly taking his hand in her own, the two shared a firm, friendly handshake. Then I won't say goodbye, but rather see you later. Blinking once, then once more, Ryuzetsu's lips twitched upward into a distinctly amused grin before her hand came up to cover her mouth as she started to outright laugh and giggle into her hand, much to Naruto's silent ire. That was very corny, actually. She continued to laugh while Naruto's internal fuming went outward and became a bit more covert when just above his eyebrow there were the makings of a very subtle twitch. Thankfully, Ryuzetsu managed to get herself back together before Naruto's irritation boiled over. The invitation works both ways. If you're ever back around these parts, track me down. Sharing one last nod born of mutual respect, the black-haired shinobi and the white-haired kunoichi turned around, walking in opposite directions, one further into the country and the other out of it. But for Naruto, he didn't get far before he was swallowed in a plume of smoke and transported out of Kusa. Kurohane Forest. When the smoke dispelled that signaled Naruto had been reverse summoned, the raven-haired man was left standing in the lounging room of the boss of the crows, Naruto's Mangekyo Sharingan boring down heavily into Shokiai's eyes, the energies in the forest fueling his ocular powers. The red floral iris on the black that was each of Naruto's eyes regarded Shokiai's deep, soulless eyes before they both smirked respectively. All right, Naruto, I want to hear your report on what happened personally. Shokai requested, knowing full well that things like if it was still alive, where it was, and what was used would all be important things that he as the boss and elder for the crows he needed to know. Nodding his head, Naruto immediately went into telling his story from how he got himself into the prison to how he got put into what was essentially solitary confinement. Then he went into how the box itself what was open before he finally told the old crow about how he defeated the thing and the sealing jutsu that he used to make sure that the terror that was the beast was over for good. The giant avian let out a sound from the space between his beak that came out like a low, piercing whistle that cut through the wooden chamber room. You Uzumaki do come up with some truly terrifying things. Well, the world is better off with that horrendous existence gone for good. I know I won't lose any sleep over it being gone. Yeah, it was quite the experience, Naruto admitted with a soft, tired chuckle as he pushed the strands of hair from over his eye and to the side of his head. Tilting his head back, Naruto peered up through the beams of light that were grazing down through the leaves and hitting him in the face. The giant bird nodded his head in understanding as he too remembered a few battles from back when he was younger that totally changed the way he looked at things, went about doing things. At least you came back all right. When your opponent is something older than even the tailed beasts, that is something worth celebrating. He let his shoulders rise and fall a few times as he took his exhaling breaths, but eventually he started to lift one of his hands and lifted it up to the hole in his trench coat that underneath showed his skin had gone back to the same complexion as the rest of his flesh. I wouldn't have been all right if I didn't have some help. That nasty thing managed to pierce me through the chest and poison me. Now that was a piece of information that caught the crow's attention. Even if Naruto's immune system was near otherworldly, the Satori was actually from another world or at least dimension, and a poison from it should be affecting him for more than just 2 days. How are you even standing then? Naruto paused for a moment, wondering what to say and what he could say about what happened. He honestly did not say something about Ryuzetsu that was false or might point her out like some person of interest, but he remembered the family they were. He trusted Shokai, which is why he told him everything he knew about what Ryuzetsu could do. By the time Naruto had finished giving his tale of what happened, Shokiai's eyes had slightly widened, not in disbelief but rather surprise at the rarity of what Naruto had run into. That girl has the blood of dragons running through her. Truly exceptional. Dragons? Naruto asked, sounding rather skeptical, as those kinds of creatures were something he only found in the stories that Hiruzen had read to him when he was a child. Surely you are kidding. I mean, other than her name and her ability to spew fire, I don't see much of a similarity. Yes, it might seem crazy for you humans. Even your oldest ancestors would have been unlikely to see the dragon race, but we summon animals were around when dragons roamed the earth. Even some of the mid-tier dragons were able to fight tailed beasts and elder summons. Recalling a rather vivid encounter with an ice dragon, Shokai ruffled his feathers. Mangekyo Sharingan eyes dilating slightly as his imagination went to work putting together skies filled with these fierce, scale-bound creatures that ruled the air and land with a whole pack that was as strong or stronger than the tailed beasts. The thought caused him to shake, but whether or not that was because it appealed to his battle lust or his fear was unknown. Using his tongue to lubricate his suddenly dry mouth, Naruto used the only question he could even think of asking. If they were so powerful, then where did they all go? Lifting one of his wings and using his beak to peck at the feathers on the inside of his wings in what was a nervous tick, he gave his answer. No one really knows. It was shortly after Hagoromo and Himura's greatest battle, and then it was like they never existed in the first place. Of course, there were a few older dragons left, but they have long since expired. Those two names sounded very familiar to Naruto, but for some reason, he just couldn't put his finger on where he heard them or who they were. Turning his head up to look at Shokai, Naruto's black and red eyes reflected that confusion. Who are Hagoromo and Himura? That is a tale for another time, my boy. Tell me now that your training is complete and the ordeal with the Satori is behind you, what will you do? Are you going back to Konoha? As much as he enjoyed having Naruto around the forest playing with the hatchlings and sparring with the older crows, he knew that to continue growing Naruto would have to leave the nest. I'll go to Konoha soon, and hopefully while I am there, I'll figure out some way to stop the deterioration on my eyes. Right now the QB is holding off the damage, but that won't last forever. Back when he was in the Uchiha district reading up on some fire release training, he saw some information about the Mangekyo Sharingan and what it could do to his body. Unfortunately, he didn't have the foresight to read up on how to fix that damage back then. But before that, I am going to visit the village of Nadeshiko. I heard that they incorporate a fierce kind of wind release into their techniques, and I want to compare their strength against my own before I go back. There was an excited gleam in his eye when he thought about going up against someone that was supposed to be good in what he specialized in. It got his blood pumping. Akatsuki meeting site. There was a dingy cave with absolutely no lighting, but it seemed that around the cave walls there were these ledges on the walls of the ground, and that could only be said because with a slight whirring sound 8 phantasmic figures appeared in a circle around the cave. The cave was silent for a moment as each pair of eyes got accommodated after literally being pulled into this meeting against their will, but that silence only lasted for a few precious moments before the clashing personalities. Well clashed. For fuck's sake. Not you heathens again. I am tired of having to deal with Kakuzu always talking about money. I don't need to hear your blasphemy too. The silver-haired cultist screamed, his voice screeching and cracked as he screamed. You're right, Haydn, because what we all want to hear is a radical fanatic screaming at the top of his lungs. Already tired of hearing the eccentric member's voice, the blue-haired wielder of the two scimitars spoke up, already annoyed. Fuck off, Kentaro. Feeling the insult grating on his nerves, Kentaro's advisement only made for Haydn's voice to get louder and more unbearable. Hee, and here I thought that the swordsmen of the Hidden Mist lost all their humor when I left them. Good to see that some people that come from that village have a little bite in that tongue behind those shark teeth. Amused by what he was watching play out in front of him, the Hidden Mist's monster grinned toothily. Kisame, please don't go around fanning those idiots' flames. They are loud enough as is without you egging them on. Knowing that this could go on for some time, the gruff voice of the puppeteer tried to curtail Kisame before things got worse. Why, Sasori-sama? Passion like that needs to be let out in one moment where it leaves a glorious impact on those around it, like a good piece of art. The blonde bomber, formerly of IWA, spoke up, seeing nothing wrong with the lively discussions. Don't be a fool. Art is something that lasts for all eternity, that thousands and thousands of people can see not only now but years into the future. That is art. What Deidara said was so disagreeable with Sasori to a fundamental level that even though he planned on staying quiet, he too found himself being drawn into an argument. And there they go talking about art again. I swear these two are nearly as bad as that idiot partner of mine, but at least they don't scream. Kakuzu, the bounty hunter and the one in charge of collecting funds for the Akatsuki, spoke up with a sigh. Come on, Kakuzu, you have to admit that watching them argue with each other like a bunch of children is amusing. I know it makes me chuckle. Hee hee. If the wielder of the Samahata had been there in person, he would have nudged Kakuzu with his shoulder as he chuckled. And as most of the meetings had started between the powerful S-class criminals, the whole group turned into a juvenile mesh of throwing insults, both spiteful and petty, at each other, until the cave was nothing more than one bowl of white noise that made it difficult for anyone to hear anyone else other than the person insulting them. It was the picture of dysfunctionality. Silence. Then, just like a dampener had been dropped over everyone's mouth, the arguments died, and everyone's head slowly craned around and looked towards the figure in the center, who was looking everywhere but nowhere at the same time with his ringed, almost dead eyes. There was something about the eyes of their leader that, even though none of them were there in person, it still felt like those harrowing, mystical eyes were carving through everything they had and right into the dark, twisted souls inside of their beings. Even Kisame, who was usually unshakable, lost his small grin as he looked at the man known as Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki. Once the silence was established, Pain started to speak out, not even bothering to look at anyone. Even Kentaro, who was directly in front of him, was not the point of his focus. It's time that we start moving and taking what is ours. The tailed beasts. At this point, all members of the Akatsuki stood a bit straighter as their posture got more serious, some because of the concept of fighting a Jinchuriki or a tailed beast, and some because they were getting excited. Kentaro, you and Deidara will go hunt down the one tail. Its Jinchuriki is the current Kazekage, so tracking it down will not be difficult. Do whatever is necessary to capture it, because once we have it extracted, the Kazekage will too die, and that is nearly as important as the one tail itself. Kentaro simply nodded his head while Deidara made a quiet remark how his art would forever change Tsunade. Kakuzu, you take Haiden and work on finding some way into Kumo's government. Spare no expense to get some way to get the two tails out of the village. Do you understand me? He paused here to glare at Kakuzu, who bit back any form of backtalk and nodded his head. Kumo is too strong for us to pull off a full-on invasion with just one team. Be discreet. Conan, you will continue to find information on the three tails and six tails. Do not fail me. Pain intoned flatly as his eyes flicked to the side at the figure next to him that had yet to say a word. The feminine, spectral figure lifted her head, causing it to rise out of her shoulders and take more of a defined, human figure that wasn't quite there before. Of course, Pain-sama. The Four Tails is somewhere out in the mountains outside of Iwagakure. He hasn't had much contact with the hidden village, as far as we know, thanks to his hermitage, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Kisame, you and Sasori will take care of this. Behind Pain, slowly out of the shadows of the cave, came what appeared to be some kind of humanoid head that had some form of weird gag between its lips and teeth. It had a total of 9 eyes, and only 2 of them were filled, with the other 7 a blank void. What about the Hachibi and Kyubi? Haiden asked, not so subtly licking his lips as he thought about sacrificing such powerful things to his lord and savior Jashin. Blinking flatly, Pain slowly turned his gaze towards the silver-haired scythe wielder, who when he met gazes with Pain went stiff as a corpse, his blood freezing cold. Those will come in time. To capture either of those beasts, we will need to respond with total force to fight those villages. Each member had their orders given to them, and none of them were going to openly question the man that some people called God. They may have been powerful in their own rights, but they were not that stupid. Zetsu, help Kentaro and Deidara. We will be sealing the Ichibi first, and I expect results by the end of the month. Do you understand? All 3 members nodded their heads. Dismissed. Akatsuki meeting site. There was a dingy cave with absolutely no lighting, but it seemed that around the cave walls there were these ledges on the walls of the ground, and that could only be said because with a slight whirring sound 8 phantasmic figures appeared in a circle around the cave. The cave was silent for a moment as each pair of eyes got accommodated after literally being pulled into this meeting against their will, but that silence only lasted for a few precious moments before the clashing personalities. Well, clashed. For fuck's sake. Not you heathens again. I am tired of having to deal with Kakuzu always talking about money. I don't need to hear your blasphemy too. The silver-haired cultist screamed, his voice screeching and cracked as he screamed. You're right, Haiden, because what we all want to hear is a radical fanatic screaming at the top of his lungs. Already tired of hearing the eccentric member's voice, the blue-haired wielder of the 2 scimitars spoke up, already annoyed. Fuck off, Kurento. Feeling the insult grating on his nerves, Kurento's advisement only made for Hayden's voice to get louder and more unbearable. Hee hee, and here I thought that the swordsmen of the Hidden Mist lost all their humor when I left them. Good to see that some people that come from that village have a little bite in that tongue behind those shark teeth. Amused by what he was watching play out in front of him, the Hidden Mist's monster grinned toothily. Kisame, please don't go around fanning those idiots' flames. They are loud enough as is without you egging them on. Knowing that this could go on for some time, the gruff voice of the puppeteer tried to curtail Kisame before things got worse. Why, Sasori-sama? Passion like that needs to be let out in one moment where it leaves a glorious impact on those around it, like a good piece of art. The blonde bomber, formerly of IWA, spoke up, seeing nothing wrong with the lively discussions. Don't be a fool. Art is something that lasts for all eternity, that thousands and thousands of people can see not only now but years into the future. That is art. What Deidara said was so disagreeable with Sasori to a fundamental level that even though he planned on staying quiet, he too found himself being drawn into an argument. And there they go talking about art again. I swear these two are nearly as bad as that idiot partner of mine, but at least they don't scream. Kakuzu, the bounty hunter and the one in charge of collecting funds for the Akatsuki, spoke up with a sigh. Come on, Kakuzu, you have to admit that watching them argue with each other like a bunch of children is amusing. I know it makes me chuckle. Hee hee. If the wielder of the Samahata had been there in person, he would have nudged Kakuzu with his shoulder as he chuckled. And as most of the meetings had started between the powerful S-class criminals, the whole group turned into a juvenile mesh of throwing insults, both spiteful and petty, at each other, until the cave was nothing more than one bowl of white noise that made it difficult for anyone to hear anyone else other than the person insulting them. It was the picture of dysfunctionality. Silence. Then, just like a dampener had been dropped over everyone's mouth, the arguments died, and everyone's head slowly craned around and looked towards the figure in the center, who was looking everywhere but nowhere at the same time with his ringed, almost dead eyes. There was something about the eyes of their leader that, even though none of them were there in person, it still felt like those harrowing, mystical eyes were carving through everything they had and right into the dark, twisted souls inside of their beings. Even Kisame, who was usually unshakable, lost his small grin as he looked at the man known as Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki. Once the silence was established, Pain started to speak out, not even bothering to look at anyone. Even Kentaro, who was directly in front of him, was not the point of his focus. It's time that we start moving and taking what is ours. The tailed beasts. At this point, all members of the Akatsuki stood a bit straighter as their posture got more serious, some because of the concept of fighting a Jinchuriki or a tailed beast, and some because they were getting excited. Kurento, you and Deidara will go hunt down the one tail. Its Jinchuriki is the current Kazekage, so tracking it down will not be difficult. Do whatever is necessary to capture it, because once we have it extracted, the Kazekage will too die, and that is nearly as important as the one tail itself. Kurento simply nodded his head while Deidara made a quiet remark how his art would forever change Tsunade. Kakuzu, you take Hayden and work on finding some way into Kumo's government. Spare no expense to get some way to get the two tails out of the village. Do you understand me? He paused here to glare at Kakuzu, who bit back any form of backtalk and nodded his head. Kumo is too strong for us to pull off a full-on invasion with just one team. Be discreet. Conan, you will continue to find information on the three tails and six tails. Do not fail me. Pain intoned flatly as his eyes flicked to the side at the figure next to him that had yet to say a word. The feminine, spectral figure lifted her head, causing it to rise out of her shoulders and take more of a defined, human figure that wasn't quite there before. Of course, Pain-sama. The Four Tails is somewhere out in the mountains outside of Iwagakure. He hasn't had much contact with the hidden village, as far as we know, thanks to his hermitage, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Kisame, you and Sasori will take care of this. Behind Pain, slowly out of the shadows of the cave, came what appeared to be some kind of humanoid head that had some form of weird gag between its lips and teeth. It had a total of 9 eyes, and only 2 of them were filled, with the other 7 a blank void. What about the Hachibi and Kyubi? Hayden asked, not so subtly licking his lips as he thought about sacrificing such powerful things to his lord and savior Jashin. Blinking flatly, Pain slowly turned his gaze towards the silver-haired scythe wielder, who when he met gazes with Pain went stiff as a corpse, his blood freezing cold. Those will come in time. To capture either of those beasts, we will need to respond with total force to fight those villages. Each member had their orders given to them, and none of them were going to openly question the man that some people called God. They may have been powerful in their own rights, but they were not that stupid. Zetsu help Kentaro and Deidara. We will be sealing the Ichibi first, and I expect results by the end of the month. Do you understand? All three members nodded their heads. Dismissed. Elemental C. Is this what sailors have to deal with on a constant basis? This is no easy job for someone without chakra. Naruto murmured to himself as he sat there at the back of his single-sail, wooden boat. The morning was a few hours, in which was why Naruto thought that it would have been all right to make his venture from the port, but he quickly found that he was sailing right into a squall on the water. His first exposure to the storm startled him only because he was in the process of meditating. Just as a way to conserve his energy for the 2-hour-long trip to the island, he needed to visit to truly restock his supplies, food, and ninja tools included. However, once that shock surprised, Naruto's body went right to work calming this storm around him. Being more than acquainted with how the property of the winds worked, Naruto left one hand extended out in front of him, using his expert control over the element to make sure that the hectic winds out on the water didn't tear through his sail. The next thing that he needed to do was a bit more of a task and required some more active concentration, as he had to dip into the knowledge that his Sharingan had allowed him to copy, the bloodline limit having activated as he used his other hand to control the waters around his boat. Now, being that water was not one of his natural elements, the concentration on Naruto's face was clear as the furrowing of his brow and the instinctual spin of the 3 tomo in each eye. He had to strain himself to not only reach the water with his chakra that was seeping through the boat, but he also had to control it, which he couldn't do with finesse, so instead he used his raw chakra reserves to overpower the water, taming it. Naruto had to wonder what was happening right now, since what was happening went against everything he got while at the port town on the mainland. The raven-haired young man wanted to be so sure that he even made sure to ask multiple sailors, fishermen, and travel captains. It was the shared sentiment that today was going to be a good weather day that led to Naruto sailing further into the land of water. Taking his eyes out of the inside of his own boat, Naruto looked up at the sky, ignoring the spray of warm, salt water that was splashing up and hitting the side of his face, while he kept his red eyes focused on the clouds overhead that were not a deep black like one would expect, but rather gray and unassuming. What the hell is going on? With both the water and winds hissing even the most minute of mistakes, a fraction of attention turned elsewhere meant that a boat would be flipped over, capsized. Normally something fatal for citizens meant an annoyance for shinobi, but nothing really more. Still, Naruto mused to himself as he looked out over the waterfront to see in the very far distance, with the aid of his Sharingan, that the port town of the island he sought to dock at was visible. That being said, it was Sharingan-enhanced vision, which meant that any kind of stable land was about an hour and a half away with the kind of weather he was having to deal with, or even longer if he had to swim or even run across the water. Well, he still could use his heaven steps to traverse the amount of space that there was, but he opted against grossly misusing his skills like that. For all the negativity he had to deal with in his voyage, Naruto was pleased to see he was only slightly off-centered from the port, which was good. In his opinion, it could have been much worse if he had reacted later than he did to this storm. He might have ended up on the opposite side of the island or miss it altogether. He wasn't sure that his stomach could handle that much longer in the form of travel without eating. Taking the hand he had up in the air and letting it relax some since the winds had died down, the closer he got to the land, he put it against his turning stomach. I hope their fish is good at least. Kurohane Forest, for all its perks, was not a place of fine cuisine. Fruit abstained. Southeast Land of Fire. The forests in the Land of Fire were always so picturesque that the people of the land admired and even gloated about it. In fact, it seemed that the people all around the Nation of Fire took so much pride in their one with nature that instead of clearing the woods to build their homes, they instead built their homes in spaces preordained by where the vegetation grew up. There was one man that did not share that sentiment, and it was the blue-haired former swordsman from the Hidden Mist, who was dressed in his black cloak with red clouds that was constantly being flourished as he took one sword in each hand and slashed any kind of vegetation that was unlucky to be in his warpath. Constantly the sound of tree branches hitting the ground and the sound of a sharp object cutting through the air filled the silence that sandwiched in the very unpleased cursing that was being spewed by Kentaro as he split or cleaved branch after branch. This is just fucking absurd. Doesn't anyone in this crazy hot country know how clear out pathways? Seriously, he growled through his sharp, shark teeth as he continued to swing and slash both of his sword arms furiously, leaving a new path in his wake without a care. Meanwhile, his blonde partner was trotting along next to him with his arms calmly hanging at his side, putting out infinitely less exertion than his clearly ruffled, perturbed partner. The impish, mocking way that his lips turned up spoke leagues of his amusement with this situation. You keep doing that, then you're going to dull your blades, Kurento-sama. Yeah. Whirling around in one furious, seething movement, Kurento cast his enraged brown eyes on Deidara while putting the edged curve of one of his scimitar to his partner's throat, an explosive anger erupting from him. Don't you dare compare my swords to the trash you're used to seeing that impostors call a blade. He hissed at the end of his breath, holding the sword to his throat until he was sure that his message was understood. The Bakutan user who did not think that his teasing jab was worth getting into a fight with a deadline hanging over their head, one that was placed directly by their leader. Calm down, Kurento-sama. It was a joke. A joke. He muttered, trying not to move too much or too abruptly, not wanting to set him off, much like one would react when in a stare-down with a wild animal. Kurento's fierce scowl faded the more that he looked into the eyes of his partner, who did not appear to be intimidated or amused. Just looking into such an empty reaction kind of killed his anger and caused the man to scoff and drop the blade. Whatever. I just want to get out of this blasted heat and away from these damnable bugs. Bugs? Maybe it was because he had his arms and everything from his neck down underneath the thick cover of his Akatsuki cloak and his head beneath the conical straw hat, but he had yet to feel even a single tiny leg crawling over his skin. Growling in frustration, he watched as a small black beetle landed on the back of his hand, lifting its little feeler legs and rubbing them together, almost deviously. Yes, bugs? He hissed out, taking the fingers on his other hand and flicking the bug away, only for another one to come and take its place. He watched his partner dealing with his frustration and frowned. Either these bugs were starved and that bold, or something else was happening. Frowning, his ears picked up on some buzzing and he looked up, his one eye widening. Kurento-sama, he called out, giving Kurento just enough time to look up as a black sphere fell on top of them. Hijitsu, Mushidama, hidden jutsu, insect sphere. The small sound of an insect's chittering, when multiplied by hundreds of thousands, became near deafening when they were all together, bouncing their communication off the others until the sound was loud enough to sound out anything else. Taicho, I got them. The Kadaichu are starting to eat their flesh. Dropping down behind the Aburame was a man in a Jounin flak jacket with gray eyes, a young woman in a Chunin jacket with markings that showed she was from the more obscure Karama clan from the Hidden Leaf. Then dropping to the ground in front of him was two men, one from the Hyuga and the other from the Inuzuka. Good work, Aburame. Pull back, you bugs. We still need to be able to identify their bodies so we can report it back to Hokage-sama. Inuzuka, Hyuga, go make sure that they are indeed dead. Don't give them a chance to blink. He barked out, making sure along with his female subordinate that their ranged fighter was protected. Go! Both men nodded their heads and walked up from pinching directions to cover any direction that they could take to escape. It was the Hyuga that lifted his hand, telling the Aburame to release his chakra-laden beetles so his Byakugan could see through their mass of chakra. One by one, beetle after beetle flaked away up into the trees above head, disappearing to go out and continue their carnivorous living elsewhere in the forest. Both the Hyuga and Inuzuka used their own special traits to search the area but found nothing. It was the Hyuga that turned to look at the captain with an unsure, unsettled frown on his face. Taicho, we got one of the bodies here, but any sign of the other one is comp dash. His report was cut off when the contingent of Hidden Leaf shinobi suddenly were alerted to a sizzling that came from the spot from between the two Konoha Chunin. Shit! It's a bomb! The Inuzuka howled as his danger instincts kicked in, and both he and tried to leap away from Deidara's body that was indeed starting to smoke. Unfortunately, for them, they couldn't clear the distance before the bomb went off with a cacophony that swallowed up the two closest to it while the other three Leaf Nin were disoriented. Boom! No! The Karama woman whispered as she watched her two friends. She joined the Chunin task force with be swallowed up in a volatile eruption of explosive power. She could already see chunks of legs, arms, and even a foot strewn around the grass that was now a combination of charred dead and soaked in blood and bone marrow. The stench was so rancid as it burnt her nose she almost wanted to throw up right at her feet. The slight ruffling from the leaves of the tree that was now half missing, and on the brink of teetering over alerted the leader of the Konoha group that Deidara dropped down in the middle of the blast site with a smirk. Not a bad piece of art at all. He said with a knowing smirk as he looked at the leader that was glaring daggers at him. It's kind of funny that you thought you'd kill me and Kurento-sama like that. Ignoring the jab at their skills and taunting at their assumptions, the jounin in charge turned his head and looked to see that both of his subordinates were still slightly shaken by the death of their comrades. You two stay back and try to strike when I make an opening. Got it? Both nodded their heads, albeit shakily. He couldn't blame them, but he couldn't allow them to go into grief either, or else then they were all gonna die for sure. I know it hurts right now, you two, but you have to focus or else you won't be seeing your family again. Ready? He didn't need to look to know they nodded. How sentimental. It makes me want to puke. The leader of the squad looked down, eyes wide to see that it was the blonde's partner literally coming out of a spot in the ground right beneath his jaw. Coming out of the ground like a rocket, Kurento delivered a sharp uppercut to the jounin's jaw, sending him flying towards a tree. Glancing towards where he kicked his opponent he smirked, seeing the jounin righting himself in time to stick his feet to the side of the tree instead of being barreled through it. Deidara, finish these two quickly, we have a job to do, he said with a light chuckle as he launched himself at the jounin, one blade at the ready. Watching his partner start to clash his sword against the pair of kunai the leaf nin used to defend himself, Deidara chuckled to himself with a brief shake of his head. When he laid his eyes on the shaking Chunin, he gave them a pitying look. You two don't stand a chance against me. The least I can do is turn you into a wonderful piece of art. This is my gift to you. His words seemed to light a momentary flame of defiance in them as both shinobi brought out a kunai, but that seemed to be the extent of their fight as they went to shaking in fear. Between the Kurama girl's left leg and the Aburame's right leg out came a white centipede that dug out of the ground, followed by another one. Faster than the two terrified shinobi could react, they were wrapped up and bound together back to back by the explosive creatures, making their eyes widen in terror when they realized that their movements were being completely restricted. Quickly, the instinctual urge to survive kicked in, and the two begged Deidara. Begged and pleaded as he brought his hand up to his mouth. Sorry, but once an artist has created his piece of work, he must let the eyes of the world see his work. In one grand, explosive moment, Katsu, near his tree, the jounin's eyes widened as he was forced to watch on helplessly as yet another explosion swallowed a second pair of his comrades. Another group of his comrades he was supposed to protect that he could not. Suru, Yevon. He whispered to himself in an eerie moment of emptiness before his blood boiled in a fury. I'll kill you both. I'll kill you for them. He screamed as he pushed off the tree, using its stability to enhance his own momentum as he drove both of his kunai straight for the heart of the swordsman that easily shifted and parried off the blows through a spray of sparks. This Konoha nin might have had the speed of the standard jounin, but it was nothing impressive to the trained, honed and tempered instincts of Kurento, who personally refused to lose to anyone until he defeated Mihawk. If this all you have, then you may as well take your own life and save me the trouble, Kurento mumbled, his eyes half-lidded and bored in having to deal with this shinobi. His pride as a shinobi, and a capable one at that, was rather large and vulnerable. The opponent of the Akatsuki could not take his pride being down-talked any longer. No, I'll kill you instead, he shouted as he performed a shunshin to relocate himself just enough that his X-slash at Kurento's throat came from just off-center. Smirking victoriously as he felt his blade striking home, he was about to demean his opponent just like he had been getting, but didn't get the chance because the blue-haired swordsman's body lost all its form and turned into water, while at the same time the actual Kurento came through the water, form swiveling around the Konoha nin and lobbing his head from his shoulders in one graceful motion. Shinkiro, Mirage. Perfectly efficient, as always, Kurento-sama. Deidara complimented him with a smile as he stepped around the decapitated corpse that was bleeding out on the grassy grounds so far off the beaten path that it was completely unlikely it would ever be discovered. Letting out an incoherent grunt, Kurento used a very low-level form of water manipulation to wash away the blood that was dripping from his blade before it could oxidize and rust over his blade. Whatever. Come on, we have to get to Tsunade soon or else pain will be breathing down our necks. Deidara had no qualms with doing that, nor did he have any plans on giving his leader any reason to investigate his actions, but that didn't stop him from asking a question that had been bothering him. How are we going to get into the village anyway, Kurento-sama? I suppose we can just carve our way through everything if we have to. No need to do that. Zetsu has set up a plan for us that should make things go smoothly. Apparently, the Hidden Sand is about to undergo a festival that is used to celebrate their Kazekage after his first 6 months in office. Because of this, the Kazekage will be expected to make an appearance, which means security is going to be buffed up. He started off marching down the path with Deidara right behind him. Fortunately, Sasori has a plant in the Sand Council that will be activated by the sight of one of the Akatsuki rings. I'll take the front gate and use this to create some havoc in their ranks where a majority of their forces are set while you fly in over the top and deal with Gaara of the desert with your ranged capabilities. Kurento finished off with a toned finality. Most out there would have a shred of hesitance in having to deal with a Kage, a village leader, but then again the Akatsuki were no normal bunch, and that showed in the excitement on Deidara's face. Yes, I will show the world the caliber of my art by taking down the world's youngest Kage, he promised, lifting one of his hands showing that there was a mouth on the palm, its tongue rolling around the mouth. With Naruto reaching into his pockets and pulling out a thing of 200 ryo for his rations, Naruto handed over his money to the elderly fisherman behind the counter that was providing him with the rations of fish that he would cook himself later for dinner and then some. Humming in satisfaction, the fisherman with a cheerful smile on his face took the money and secured it safely in his register beneath the top counter of his vendor's stall. Looking up and seeing Naruto still putting his goods away, he initiated some conversation. It's not often that I get to serve someone as famous as Naruto Uchiha, he said with a grin. Naruto's reaction, however, was nowhere near as kind as his posture tightened up. His eyes chilled over and his fingers twitched dangerously. What was that? In these times, people who knew a name before being introduced could be considered dangerous, and Naruto wasn't going to let an appearance fool him. The old man quickly realized that he personally had forgotten about a thing called shinobi paranoia, where because of the chaotic lifestyle they led, they went into hyper alert when anyone knew who they were, when that person being the shinobi, didn't believe the person they were talking to should know who they were. Not feeling the desire to be set on fire, the old shopkeep amended his statement. For an old man like me who keeps his eyes on what is happening in the world, it is easy to recognize the last international Chunin exams, even if your hair did get a bit longer and your body taller. A moment. That is how long Naruto's chilling blue eyes stared unmoving into the eyes of the merchant before Naruto was able to pick up that the man was indeed telling the truth without a hint of having an ulterior motive. Right? I guess I am not too familiar with my unwanted fame. Naruto suggested the reasoning behind his behavior with a slight shrug of his shoulders and not even a flinch of his facial features. Nodding his head, not impressed but rather refreshed by the younger man's point of view, the older man decided to give his 2 cents. That's good, young man, keep that modesty and that head on your shoulders and people will come to you like animals to a soft light. I don't want people to follow me around, Naruto muttered, keeping that thought to himself so as to avoid some unnecessary and honestly unwanted opinions from the old man in front of him. Keeping the inhale he wanted to take to himself, Naruto bowed his head, just a fraction showing his gratitude for the service he was just provided. I'll keep that in mind, sir. Thank you for the fish. And with that, Naruto took a few steps back before he continued down the merchant row. He had made it 5 minutes down the road back towards the port when his momentum was stopped by someone who just ran into his shoulder, not only causing the man who ran into him to drop something but for Naruto's body to turn the opposite direction with the momentum. The man currently crouching down trying to pick up some lugs and bolts had a rather broad body that even under his pink shirt and purple overcoat that the man with brown hair and brown glasses wasn't in the best condition. After the bespectacled man was done scouring through the dirt and dust to forge for the items he bought back into one confined place, he lifted his head and peered up at Naruto over the top of his glasses. A nervous smile put Naruto's way. I'm sorry about that, sir. I was in such a hurry that I wasn't paying attention, chuckling because he didn't know what else to do once he got to his feet. But before the encounter could continue any further, the strange man quickly turned back towards his original direction and scrambled away. That was strange, Naruto whispered to himself, looking at the man's fleeting back before he too turned around and went back towards the port. From the back of his head, the raven-haired shinobi heard another voice speaking up, its tone predictably rough and surly. I believe that Ningen was what your kind call a nerd. His presence alone was enough to make me disgusted. Lifting his brow, Naruto continued his relaxed pace towards the other end of the island, and already he could pick up the heavier content of ocean salt in the air. That's harsh even for you, Kyubi. I am an entity of malice and destruction. If that fool would have bumped into me like that, I would have flayed the skin right from his bones. The giant nine-tailed Kyubi sealed inside of Naruto scoffed vehemently. Shaking his head and ignoring the few people that were looking at him oddly, Naruto replied to the massive chakra inside of him. And that is why you have been passed from Uzumaki to Uzumaki over the years. Perceiving what Naruto said to be an insult, the creature long embodying destruction itself let out a menacing growl that rung inside of Naruto's ears. Not that Naruto showed any signs of being worried by the Kyubi. You might have made my stay here more bearable, you damned Uchiha, but mark my words, I will eviscerate you one day in the not-so-near future. Chuckling as he made the last turn he needed to take to make it towards the port district, Naruto stopped just to the side of the signpost that told him where he was on the island. And I told you that when that day comes I will defeat you not with my eyes but my hands. There was a moment of silence before, much like the black-haired ninja, the orange-furred Kyubi too started to chuckle, though his chuckle was much deeper of a baritone than Naruto's. You do realize that? I know that is why I stopped here. I'll talk to you later, he said, cutting off their connection before he turned around and saw maybe 20 steps away from him were two women. One of them was in a black cloak with a hood pulled over her head, while the other had the same cloak but her hood down, showing her red lipstick and angled face. Why are you following me? Naruto asked briskly as he looked at the cloaked figure to the woman behind her. A person she assumed who was her attendant. He didn't know who was going to provide the answer he sought, so when the completely shrouded one spoke up his eyes snapped to her, glued there. I am here to fight you. Her voice was flat, almost detached in nature, hiking up one eyebrow that lifted upwards under the strands of black hair that were hanging over one of his eyes, mostly covering it. Why on earth would I do that? He asked curiously. Sure, his schedule wasn't that packed, but that didn't mean he was going to go around answering any challenge that was thrown his way. This time, it was the attendant, Tokiwa, that gave a brisk answer as her eyes flicked from her mistress to Naruto, who was standing there with his arms pulled across his chest. Because of agreement between Jiraiya-sama's agreement with Shizuka-sama's sensei that his next student would fight Shizuka when she came of age. Unfortunately, Namike-sama is married, so this agreement falls to you, his only son. Naruto's gaze went from curious to near deadly in a flash as he stared down. Tokiwa, to her credit, didn't flinch as she stood behind Shizuka, who still seemed to be looking off at the ground. I haven't worried myself with their affairs, and I don't plan on starting now. Tokiwa looked at Shizuka with a soft frown on her painted lips before Shizuka, with an irritated sigh, pulled her hood down, revealing her beautiful features. Her deep, green eyes peering fearlessly into his blue as her black hair blew with the wind. I don't care what your relationship with your father is, honestly, Naruto Uchiha, but my village's customs demand I find a powerful opponent and defeat him in a battle to the death. If for some reason I lose, you will have an entire village of women at your command, myself included, as your wife. I refuse to fight you, Shizuka. Now, I'll ask you leave me alone. Naruto finished off icily, trying to use his raw presence to make the Nadeshiko kunoichi without drawing the civilians around them into this. All it would take was one wrong movement here in the land of water and he might set something off far more deep-reaching. Frowning at his refusal, Shizuka glared heatedly at Naruto, which was even more unsettling with the empty way her eyes reflected anything. Why is it because I am a woman? Are you afraid of losing to a woman? Can your fragile complex not take that? She taunted him with a mocking smirk. Here Naruto outright snorted at the claim thrown his way. Naruto actually recognized her headband as a Nadeshiko kunoichi, but that didn't change his mind. He proposed that maybe some of his ancestors like Madara Uchiha might have considered women to be weak and fragile since he was one of the last true old guard, but that was not him. No, I won't fight you because that law is the stupidest thing I have heard in years. That law takes away your ability to choose, that is why. For a moment the words Naruto just spoke overlapped and then synced with the words that a younger she had said when she first found out of the expectations put on top of her. The defiance, the want to be free, hearing it from someone else made her freeze in place, silent for a few long moments. Then the reality of the world she lived in came back to her. All the voices telling her of her responsibility to her teacher, to her village, and to her sense of honor as a Nadeshiko warrior. Feeling that familiar cold feeling swelling inside of her, she slowly undressed, handing her cloak and traveling pack to Tokiwa. Standing there in a gray-blue battle suit that hugged to her body, showcasing her shapely figure along with a shoulder guard on her right shoulder, and near the center opened up, revealing even more of her fair flesh and her large cleavage. Her hair showed itself to go back down all the way to her waist while she pulled her gloves tight. Fine, then stand there and die. I have a duty to my village to fight you here and now. Whereas Shizuka was preparing herself for battle, Naruto was still standing there, arms drawn over his chest, eyes regarding her stoically. His patience with her one-minded way of thought was being tried. Really, because to me it looks like you are just giving up without trying to make your own choice. Nearly losing her cool, calm and focused, Shizuka had to bite the inside of her lip to refrain from lashing out right back at his easily spoken words that had no base to them. What would you know about my situation? Nothing, that's what, she said quietly as her eyes tried to rip through Naruto with all their intensity. You're right, I don't know you, but I can see that you're giving up on your ability to choose. You're not fighting for yourself. Naruto spoke with a shake of his head that was clearly one of disappointment. The air around Shizuka started to circulate, blowing and tossing her long ponytail all around as she nearly assaulted Naruto right there for speaking to her like that, but she held on by the smallest of threads. What would you do when there was a whole village there to crush your dreams? No family there to point you the way you are meant to go, only dragging you down your destined path. What Shizuka failed to know was a number of similarities and parallels that she and Naruto actually shared. Much like Naruto spoke without knowing, she too ripped into him without knowing of his personal life. It was these life experiences Naruto had that allowed him to give an answer full of conviction. I'd get back up and continue to fight for what I want to do, who I want to be. Laughter. That was the sound that tore through the light wind. Laughter that belonged to Shizuka. It was a sound that had no warmth or fondness in it, but rather a dry mockery. Narrowing his eyes at her, the Nadeshiko stopped laughing, her expression flat and empty as a white wall. Yet here you are afraid to fight a girl. You're just like all men out there. All talk, no substance. Shizuka's last insult was all Naruto could take, and it was not solely because she was slowly wearing down on his ego. No, it was something a bit deeper than that. Something that affected him down the darkest corners of his insecurities. It was only because of what happened back at the blood prison that he was even able to look at someone who was a reflection of what he could have been had he folded when he was younger, that he was able to do this. Fine. I'll show you just why we are meant to make choices. Tokiwa, who had been watching the verbal confrontation unfold, silently stepped forward between Naruto and her mistress. She looked from Shizuka to Naruto and then back before she nodded. I know a place that this fight can take place. Follow me. Naruto and Shizuka's battlefield. Doton Tekenro. Earth release. Iron Fist Prison. The ground itself started to shake before from the earth sprouted out tall steel walls that popped out one at a time until the starting point was met from the other side by a same steel plate wall that started off the circular dome. Both Naruto and Shizuka were standing on top of the walls, but Naruto was more interested in watching the ground be cleared out, leaving a completely emptied trench crater for a field. When Shizuka jumped down, Naruto did the same, leaving the man and woman standing on opposite sides of the field, keeping a blank stare on the other, sizing each other up for a few silent moments. Figuring trying to ask one more time would not hurt things, Naruto spoke out, breaking the silence. Do you really want to do this? Yes, I need to do this. She spoke her beliefs in her duty, and her lack of belief of following what she wanted was not going to change now. The only thing that mattered to her was proving that she was stronger than Naruto. Closing his eyes, Naruto took one last deep breath before he opened his blue eyes and took off his trench coat. He didn't have the materials to get it fixed should things go wrong, so instead he just took the coat off and tossed it to the side, leaving him bare-chested, the scar on his chest as drawing as the seal on his stomach. Shizuka was plenty used to her male opponents leering at her, and she usually used that to her advantage, but when she got the chance to take in Naruto's toned upper body, she took it for a few moments before focusing again right as he spoke. Show me what you have then. She wasted no time rushing forward with her hand wrapped in a coating of wind chakra that actually looked so volatile that it actually wasn't clear but slightly foggy. Holding his ground until she was right on top of him, Naruto waited to the last moment and slipped to the side, avoiding her attack. Nadeshiko Ryu. Koha Reppuken. Nadeshiko style. Hardliner Gale Fist. The Uzumaki clan head was expecting maybe a gust of air to burst out from her palm, much like Chakra did from those aiming to disable the Tenketsu, but what he got was actually a roar of wind that fissured the ground around her and actually had enough force that it put a cut on his cheek that started to bleed slightly. So this is the Nadeshiko style, how fierce. He mused to himself as he started to leap away from the ground that was breaking near his feet. Quickly, she took advantage of the fact that Naruto had to be on the retreat lest the ground toss him to the floor by jumping into the air. A kunai lodged between each of her fingers, the blades gleaming dangerously. Nadeshiko Ryu, Shinku Enbyu, Nadeshiko style, Crimson Dance Performance. Throwing her barrage of kunai right at Naruto's body in a wide arc, she powered her kunai, increasing their speed and cutting power with her wind chakra. Dodging the first few handfuls of kunai, Naruto expected that to be it, but much to his surprise, she continued to lash out, throwing kunai after kunai at him with a graceful fluidity that showed no signs of stopping. Weaving and ducking the blades by the thinnest of margins, Naruto realized that she wasn't going to stop. Enbyu. And I know Dan. Dance performance. Second step. Somehow she floated in midair and started to make use of her own momentum and of course the air around her to turn her body to spin so fast that the air around her twisted and turned like a small tornado. Then out of that tornado came a flurry of deadly accurate kunai, all still powered by her wind chakra. Impressed, Naruto looked up at the blades that were coming down on him almost like black rain and stood his ground. A seal briefly flashed on the back of Naruto's hand before trusty blade Twilight appeared in his hand, already coursed through with wind chakra, which he used to cancel out hers, his swordplay flourishing and twisting to deflect the blades away as he slowly walked closer to her. There is no way she can see me spinning that fast. Just got to get close, he told himself as he got closer and closer. The closer he got, the faster his hands had to be, but Naruto was up to the challenge, but just before he got into striking range, she stopped spinning, her hand already up to her mouth. Shit! He cursed, already bracing himself. Risenpu Violent Whirlwind. Naruto could feel the pressure of the wind trying to crush his body, but it was bearable as he dug his feet into the ground, using it to stop his sliding back. His own wind manipulation being used to cut through the stream. Why aren't you fighting back? Are you looking down on me? You still haven't even used your Sharingan. She growled, slightly feeling that her skills were being overlooked, that all her work was being diminished. Brushing the dirt and dust off of his skin in what could be considered a very flippant gesture, Naruto looked at the glowering Kunoichi for a moment before he gave an unapologetic shrug. You can look at it that way, but if you want to know what I am doing really, then I'll tell you. Dueling another wind user. Her eyes widened slightly, even losing their sharpness for a moment before she gained her game face again. Then fight back. She all but ordered him with a passionate shout, wanting a real fight. Very well. By the time his words had been carried to her by the winds themselves, he was already gone, and she was on high alert. Sensing it at the last second, Shizuka turned her body completely around to see Naruto already behind her with his attack in hand. Futon. Shinkagyoku. Wind release. Vacuum sphere. Was that a Shunshin? He's so fast, she said in a slight panic, and just before Naruto's attack could hit her right in the stomach, she thrust both of her hands down into Naruto's one hand. Her hands were coated with the same wind chakra from earlier. Chakra-laced hands about to impact the sphere in the Konoha Nin's hand. Nadeshiko Ryu. Koha Repuken. Nadeshiko style. Hardliner Gale Fists. The volatile force of the two powerful wind-based attacks going off right against each other created a tornado in a vortex that could not be contained by either Shizuka nor Naruto. Quicker than either expected, the powerful, unruly wind quickly broke free from the vortex that was created and sent both bodies skidding to opposite sides of the battlefield. Gasping for the oxygen that was ripped right from her body, Shizuka tried to arch her back off the painful angle that she fell a rock onto. Get up! She screamed at herself, knowing she was still in battle. Scrambling to sit up, immediately she looked ahead where she thought Naruto would be. It's over. Naruto's quiet voice caused her eyes to widen as she felt his palm resting on the back of her neck. All he used was wind techniques and he defeated me this easily? How strong is he? Shizuka thought in disbelief. Closing her eyes, she didn't know what to do now that her strength, that she had been gaining for years, failed her. Your techniques are powerful, but they are too straightforward. Maybe implementing a variant wind technique that provides you some more range. Naruto mused as he kept his hand on the back of her neck in case she tried anything rash. Please, deliver the final blow. She spoke up in a soft tone, hollowed by defeat. Frowning slightly, Naruto pulled his hand back, standing straight up, towering over her seated frame. I told you that I wasn't interested in fighting you for that, or because I wanted you or your village. Then I'll take the girl. A voice spoke up from off to the side before the ground rumbled, and from out of the earth came a massive robot's hand that not only batted Naruto back from the girth of its hand, but also already had its bulky fingers wrapped around Shizuka's body. What an underhanded trick! Tokiwa spat out with disdain as she prepared to free her mistress using the long blade fastened to her back. Already worming her way out of the grip, Shizuka smirked as she pushed her foot off of the closest thing to a face that the robot had, using it to gain elevation. This is nothing, she proclaimed as her foot was coated in that powerful wind chakra that she used to deliver an axe kick that carved up the metal like wet paper before she leaped back from the explosion. The woman with the ample bust didn't even have the time to land on the ground before this strange red and violet seal appeared on her stomach. Her eyes widened, dilating in pain as she thought lightning was spreading through her. All that pain came to a stop, replaced by a numb feeling as she was pulled towards the porky man that Naruto recognized from earlier. Finally, Shizuka and Nadeshiko village are mine, he roared in victorious laughter, his head drawn back as the sound of his victory clamored out to the heavens. With my bolts connecting you to my control, I will have rule all of Nadeshiko. The man was too distracted, and Naruto was just too quick that he didn't even notice as Naruto appeared in front of him with his sword running with wind chakra. It was only when he cut the chakra strings freeing Shizuka did her captor look down at Naruto's cool blue eyes that struck him with fear. Catching her with one arm, Naruto transformed his wind chakra to lightning chakra and held the blade horizontally over the top of his head like an animal bearing its fangs. Scum like you needs to be removed permanently. Uchiha no Kiba, Suri Shogeki. Fong of the Uchiha. Suspended impact. 1. Crackling that was the only real sound that the glasses-wearing man could hear as the lightning flourished upwards in random, violent spikes before in a flash of light blew the energy fired forward, maintaining the slender, slightly curved nature of the blade. The attack went straight forward and cut right underneath the man's throat at the topmost center of his chest, the blade impaling the man against the metal wall, his feet hanging off the ground. Ignoring the now corpse, Naruto turned away from the body that had blood dripping from its mouth, instead paying attention to Shizuka, who was looking at the man holding her with a slight blush due to the contact with Naruto, who was still shirtless. Working her way from his grip, she stood up and looked at him with an accusatory glare. Why did you save me? First, it was her refusal to leave him alone, and then it was her insistence to fight him, and finally it was her showing a complete lack of gratitude for being helped out of a situation. Frankly, Naruto was fed up with it all and let it burst out from his mouth in some not choice words. I am tired of your shitty attitude. The least you can do is show some gratitude. Her eyes went down for a moment, breaking their glaring match, because as she thought about it, and she did come off as an ungrateful brat. She was raised better than that, and she was going to reflect that. Taking a calming breath, she turned back to Naruto with a minuscule frown on her face. I didn't mean it like that. You had the chance to defeat me, or at least get away from this fight you clearly don't want. Is that what you want? Do you want me to defeat you? To kill you and end this quest you put yourself on? His words made her eyes widen and her body recoil in shock, but Naruto continued on with his words, while she was vulnerable to their message. You have spent so long with your heart and mind locked away because of what you are expected to do that you have forgotten what it means to make a choice of your own. Looking away off to the side, Naruto's blue eyes squinted, nearly closing them as he reached down and put back on his trench coat, leaving the zipper down the center open, enjoying the breeze against his warm flesh. I really don't know much about marriage, so I won't say anything about that, but I know someone should be able to choose what they want to do. That's... She muttered, short on words, but with plenty of awe filling her normally void, green eyes. Not only had he defeated her with ease, begrudgingly admitted, but he also saved her from that crude puppeteer and continued to challenge everything she was forced to believe. Her silence was taken by Naruto as something for him to continue on speaking, doing so without him even really knowing why he was doing it. There is this girl that I am arranged to marry from another village. I don't know her all that well, but I made the choice to do this because it will make those around me safe, and she chose the same. It might not be the best thing for me, but at least had the ability to make that choice. Looking up into the white, fluffy clouds that were slowly drifting across the clear, blue sky that was left without a blemish over the top of them. Smiling fondly, Naruto's eyes eventually came back to the attentive face of Shizuka, who had not seen that level of affection on Naruto's face or in his eyes. If my choice can keep smiles on the faces of the innocent children at my village, then I can gladly bear the choice that I might not be as happy as I could be elsewise. Or I might even end up happy. Who really knows? How can you sacrifice your own life for people you don't even know? She asked, hanging on every word like it was an answer to a divine riddle or some kind of cosmic problem. Naruto's blue eyes glazed over for a moment as memories of his childhood spent out in dirty alleys, in the woods with wild animals that were as ready to rip out his throat as the villagers who were supposedly more civilized. If I can provide a place for children to follow their dreams, or anyone for that matter, just through my actions, then I can shoulder the burdens that come with that. I can't make my choices. I have a destiny, expectations. Though she might have worded that, she did not sound anywhere as near as confident or as sure in her words as she was when she first met Naruto. Turning his shoulder to her, but still looking over at her with something of a smirk on his lips, Naruto gave a shrug. You have the talent to change things? Or, as selfish as it may sound, take the opportunity and leave behind that life to someone who wants it and find something that you want. Oh, that reminds me, your follower. I put her under a genjutsu with a clone and sent her back to your room just in case I had to make a getaway. Goodbye, Shizuka. Figuring this was the best he could try and get his message to her, Naruto turned and started to walk away from her. Silently, the Nadeshiko Kunoichi watched as Naruto walked towards the walls of smoke that were born from the metal walls being brought down thanks to Tokiwa being put under the effect of a genjutsu. As she watched them, she remembered what her mentor told her on her deathbed. Yes, Shizuka-chan. You bear the weight of your destiny on your shoulders, but that doesn't mean that you need to keep yourself locked away in the darkness of your heart. In that moment, she didn't know it, but those metaphorical chains that were wrapped around her heart, constricting it, started to slacken, to fall away as she looked at Naruto's back moving slowly but surely ahead. Making her choice, the lovely woman ran forward and came to a sliding stop next to Naruto, who stopped, curious as to her action. Wait, I am making a choice, Naruto. I want to follow you. There was a moment of silence. Then a second, and finally a few seconds turned into then seconds before Naruto's mind finally rebooted. Wait, what? He asked, rather stumped by what was happening. I want to follow you, Naruto. That is my choice. She wasn't going to tell it to him bluntly, but she wanted to see just what kind of life that the man in front of her lived, and there was no better way to do that than to be on the path with him. For the first time in quite some time, Naruto didn't know what to say, and that came through in the owlish look he gave her. Stunned. That's not what I meant. Why not? As your fiancé, it is expected of me to be near you, by your side. She returned heatedly. First, he was telling her to make her own choices, and now he wasn't going to let her make the first choice she had made freely in some time. It was absurd. That one word rung inside of his head, the weight of that word causing a light blush to come to his cheek as he nearly gawked at her. What do you mean, fiancé? He shouted back, not at all on that train of thought. Now it was Shizuka's turn to let a red flush fill her creamy complexion as she averted her eyes and glanced to the side with one of her hands holding onto her arm. Well, you did beat me. We are technically now engaged, and since I won't be taking your choice by bringing you back to my home, I have decided to come with you to your home, she stated confidently. Her eyes were all Naruto needed to know to realize she wasn't going to back down. When being face down with his own logic, Naruto had two options. The first was to deny her request, thus marking himself as a hypocrite, or to take her with him. He wasn't ready to openly put himself out as contradictory. He just sighed and relented. Fine. Come on, we need a place to camp before it gets too dark. 12 nights later, Tsunade, Kazekage-sama, Gara-sama. If you ask the current Kazekage, Garasabaku was told when he was younger that one day the adoration-filled cheers of the populace of Tsunade were going to be thrown at him instead rotten foods. He would have killed them on the spot. Yet here he was 6 months into his reign as the Kazekage of the village, hidden in the sand, and they no longer saw him as the monster that was sealed away inside of him, but the most vital person to them that existed currently. It was almost overwhelming, but still it brought a soft smile to his face as he gazed upon his village, lit up so bewitchingly with lanterns and festive banners. Things had been going very well since he took over, the mistakes of his father's power-hungry ruling style being replaced by a reactionary kind of way of governing from Gaara that both supported the people physically in the safety of a stronger shinobi force to mentally by providing a safer, more prosperous place to call home. Sure, they were not quite at the standing of the hidden leaf or the hidden cloud, but he was more than certain that they could fight off the hidden stone should they try anything, and hopefully soon they would be the peers of the stronger villages. His musings on the present and future of his village were cut short by the sound of a hand knocking on his door a few times before the door opened and Gaara's brother Kankuro walked into the room, smirking at the pleased expression on his younger brother's usually empty face. "They're waiting for you to deliver your speech to them, Gaara," he said with a smirk that grew on his face as he looked upon his little brother dressed in the Kazakage's robes. It filled him with pride. Gaara nodded silently, already having prepared himself a small excerpt that he would deliver to the people that gathered to see him. Of course, this required security being upped in a number of high places all around the festival grounds, along with a slight increase in a number of men and women put on the main gate. He tried his best to dissuade his sister from going overboard, but she was having none of his arguments, which led to him giving in to her demands. The two brothers took a quick stroll out to the balcony of the Kazakage's tower before, as planned, Gaara created a sand platform that took him high into the sky above his people that were thrown into a frenzy at the sight of their beloved Kazakage. Kankuro, now that he was alone on the balcony, let out a single, proud tear roll out of the glazed eye and down his cheek. Years ago he wasn't even able to risk walking next to his brother without being maimed or worse, but now here he was with his little brother as the Kazakage, the strongest ninja in their village. And it all seemed to start back after the Chunin exams, after the last international Chunin exams, where his brother came up to him and just spoke his mind. "Kankuro, I am tired of people looking and treating me like a bomb waiting to go off. I want to be someone that inspires confidence and awe in people. I want people to look up to me. I want people to feel safe when I am around, and that starts today, Kankuro. I hope that you and Temari will support me." He could still remember the smile Gaara gave him that day as clear as any other memory he had. It was one of his most cherished memories. Gaara panned his gaze across the adoring crowd before he sighed once, calming down the butterflies he felt fluttering inside of him. He could do this. He had done it already when he convinced the council that he was the right choice to take over the position from his father. Many a year ago, many of you thought that I was a monster only meant to kill and harm those you love. You weren't wrong in thinking so, but still you all gave me the opportunity to prove to you that I could change, and that all started 6 months ago when I became the Kazakage. Gaara's firm voice washed over the silent night sky, dropping down and reaching each and every onlooker down below. From up above, he could see the shamefaced expressions on a number of older individuals in the crowd, but no longer did he hold any ill will towards them, which allowed him to continue on without malice or hate. "You all showed that you were hesitant at my appointment, but because of how young I am not who I was, and I thank you for that. I thank all of you for that." Here he let out a truly warm smile that made some of the ladies who had a crush on him blush, the children that admired him to cheer in their squeaky voices, and the men that supported him to grin. "In return, I have used my blood, flesh, and soul to defend you all from anyone who sought to take away what is ours." The crowd started to applaud, but Gaara continued to speak, louder. "As long as I, Gaara Sabaku, am your Kazakage, no harm will reach you. Tsunade will be." Gaara's attention was caught by something that suddenly made a charge towards him from the sky, even higher than he was. Whatever the projectile was, it was moving so fast that all he could tell was that it was a white blur. Eventually, it got close enough to his face that he was able to depict it as some kind of strange mockingbird that was made of clay. Katsu, an explosion of sulfuric, bright smoke swallowed Gaara, hiding him from the view of civilians and shinobi. The shouts of Gaara's name and the cries of jubilation were quickly replaced by shrieks of panic and confusion as they saw the strange, massive owl start to slowly drop in altitude until it was floating right where their Kazakage was. It was only when the shinobi who knew this wasn't right started to move them somewhere safe did the civilians realize what was happening. Their Kazakage was being attacked. Nd.